Keep your heat up.
61. It's been at 61 the last.
Just so hot-blooded, that's the...
Yeah, there you go. Good to go? Okay. Terry, you good to go? Okay. We'll call this Saline City Council work meeting to order on Monday, April the 17th at 6:04 p.m. Members present this evening are Council members Kamara Sulak, Del Orco, Gearbaugh, Mayor Pro Tem Dillon, and Mayor Marl. Mr. Seal will be absent, and you may have seen you may have been able to view an email from Councilmember Rice earlier today. She will likely be late to the work meeting, possibly the regular meeting as well. From city staff, we have the city manager, the city clerk, city engineer, DPW director, along with the community development director. At this time, the chair would entertain a motion to approve the agenda as submitted unless there are amendments.
Approve as submitted?
Moved by Gearbaugh to approve as submitted. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Kamara Sulak. All those in favor of approving the agenda as submitted signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. Let's deal with the excusing of absences at the end of the meeting. I know we'll have at least one, possibly two. So at this point, we come to public comment. Under the Open Meetings Act, any citizen may come forward at this time and make comment or question to City Council. This public comment period will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Anyone who would like to speak is requested but not required to state his or her name and address for the record. The record will reflect there are no citizens present at the moment. Clerk Royal, did we receive any comments in advance of tonight's meeting in which the individual wanted their remarks read at this time? Easy enough. Then there are no public comments. Then we transition to the one and only discussion item of the evening, which is engineering design standards. City Manager O'Toole, would you like to kick it off, or would you like me to turn it over to City Engineer Humphreys?
I will hand it over to this extremely talented team.
Thank you.
And Engineer Humphreys, if you wouldn't mind introducing our guests, that would be great.
Absolutely. Here with me tonight I have Marcus McNamara and Sally Boss with OHM. They've been integral in helping prepare these standards since Council authorized them in late December of last year. So thank you, everybody, for being here. I realize engineering standards are not the most exciting topic, but it's something that I view as an absolute tool that's necessary to do a good job and to properly manage all of the infrastructure that the city owns. So tonight we have a short presentation, and I wanted to do this work session to present to council some of the key items that are changing in the engineering design standards so that when you get the full document here in a couple months, you know what you're looking at. I'm trying to highlight the key changes and that we've, from past policy practice for council to, for us to discuss tonight, I guess. So in this PowerPoint presentation, I have split it into 3 sections, and I can keep talking, or we can stop at the end of each section and go, I'm hoping for our ultimate discussion tonight. So not only do we have the PowerPoint, I've attached a few other attachments to the council package tonight that I'll refer to as we go through. So
let's do this, Engineer Humphreys. Let's start by taking it section by section.
Okay.
Maybe when you feel it's an appropriate time to stop initially, you can do so. We can see if there's imminent or timely questions. If there are not, then we'll just keep going with the presentation and entertain any questions, concerns, thoughts at the very end.
okay, good plan. So I'm trying to get off this first slide, and I still see the first slide.
Is the forward button on the remote one? It was working for me before.
Well, this button, right?
Yeah. I tested it. No, and then on the top.
Yeah, there we go. There we go.
Right here.
That's what I hit.
It was working before.
Turned it off and on. Would this button hit?
Hit it.
It's like dead. It's like frozen.
Please stand by.
There you go.
There it goes.
I think it's just view show or slideshow. There you go.
All right.
Just use the space bar.
Oh, space bar. I can do space bar. I just can't go back, I guess. So once I hit it, there's no going back. I think I did the introduction. We'll keep going. Okay, so here's the summary of the crucial updates to the design standards. Here on the left side of your screen is the current cover sheet of our current design standards. I think they're dated originally from 1994. We have done a few updates since then. We've been required by the state to do updates to our standard sewer and water details, but that's what our base that we're working from. The critical upgrades that we're bringing tonight, and these are the sections that the presentation is split into, is upgrades upgrades to the plan review process and construction closeout process, and this has to do with when new development is bringing public infrastructure that we ultimately are going to own and maintain, and making sure that that public infrastructure is built to our standards. The second bullet has to do with stormwater calcs, and we'll talk a little bit about the changes in regulations over the years. The third bullet here has to do with road widths, and that is something that I've spoken to council about a couple times with a recent work session on capital improvement plans, implementations, and some concerns. So we'll dive a little bit deeper into that later in the presentation here. And then lastly, just how ordinance updates are required along with these standards required updates. So diving into the first section, which has to do with our policies and procedures. The left side of this slide has to do with the plan review process. We just summarized that. I've asked Community Development Director Ben Harrington to be here tonight because we've been working closely with his department on ensuring that new development applies to both his standards and these updated engineering standards. On the left is really where the new requirements are coming in. On the next slide, I'll get into a little bit more detail on the project closeout procedures, but one of the biggest things that we're recommending to change is that the inspection to be provided by the city engineering consultant. Right now, our engineering standards require that inspection services are provided by the developer. So I'm not proposing that we change the basis of our standard. I'm just proposing who does that inspections on our behalf. I feel very strongly that staff time should be dedicated to maintaining our infrastructure, and a developer should pay all of the fees associated with the impacts on our infrastructure. And developers are more than happy to put into escrow funds to pay for our engineering consultant to oversee the inspection of that infrastructure. And that's the biggest change, I think, as far as one of the biggest changes coming out as far as policies that's coming with these updated standards. Going along those lines, I'm speaking to a larger residential development, not that commercial developments don't have these, they have them on much smaller scales. Commercial developments often will have maybe public water mains, public sanitary sewers, but residential larger subdivision developments have public roads, public water main, public sanitary sewer, public storm, and a portion of the storm sewer is public. There's often in storm, there's a portion that's public and private. And one of the other big changes that we're recommending in this is that we start this utility acceptance phase. So what gets built first is the deepest utility. So sanitary sewer goes in first, and then the water main, and then the storm, and then the road gets built up. I'm recommending that we implement this intermediate phase of utility acceptance to making sure that the water main is built to our standards, the sanitary sewer is built to our standards, before we issue a certificate of occupancy for the first residential unit. That way, before we're setting a meter, we have a lot of control at that point still, and we can get all of our sanitary sewers cleaned, we can get all of our water main tested, all of that stuff can be done. We can't do the final road acceptance for multiple reasons. One, that's never built at that point. They're still building portions of the road. And two, as the development, there's damage that's done to the road during construction of the houses. So that's another big change that we're proposing is this, and I think these bullets on the left outline that substantial completion letter, the process that we would go through for that. And then the final inspection would be at the very end when the roads were built, and then we would get final acceptance of all of the utilities. And that concludes the summary of the first section, of which is updates to policies and procedures.
Well, I have some questions, so
Okay.
let's break. They're easy ones. Tasha, you and I spoke very early in your tenure about engineering design standards and the fact that while there had been some revisions and modifications, as you articulated at the beginning of your presentation, the bulk of our existing standards date back nearly 30 years. Mm-hmm. So I guess my first question, and this would be maybe for you and our guests, our friends from OHM, I'd like to see this organization put into practice more timely reviews of all pertinent documents and internal protocols, not just design engineering standards. So how often should engineering standards be looked at, and what is a best practice for revisions? It can't be 30 years.
Right. I view engineering standards as a living document, just like you would view a master plan, because there's always going to be a small model number or curb stop or something that changes that lives in the document. So the engineering standards themselves consist of these kind of overall broad policies and then detailed specifications, excuse me, where you are listing out truly the manufacturer, model number, and type for the components that make up all of our infrastructure, our public infrastructure. So I view it as a living document, and in a much newer community I used to work for, so we had a much newer set of standards, and so it was easier to start from. I would probably take something every couple of years, but I would continually take minor updates. And in fact, that's one of the recommendations when we're getting to accepting or recommending approval of this is how does that read? Does council approve these standards with minor modifications allowed by staff, and then it comes back to council every just for a look, that type? Because I view the minor modifications as necessary to keep it current and active with all the various parts of our industries.
Yeah, and I strongly support you on that, and I would be an advocate for that. I'd also be an advocate for the document in its totality coming back for review, I don't know, every 2-5 years. What is reasonable?
I'd say as long as you have the process in there to handle minor changes to, a material spec or something, as an errata or some other interim. But most communities that we see look at the full document between every 5 and 10 years. So similar to kind of the whole master plan process, you need to at least go through page by page every 5 to 10 years, I would say, and make sure that we got to read through everything and see if there is anything that needs to be changed.
Yeah, I guess my perspective or my thought would be to err on the side of caution and do it every 5 as opposed to 10. As I look back on my tenure, not only as mayor but also council member, I can see some hiccups, some problems that were created, and at least to me, it's simple dot connecting that, in retrospect, there weren't timely, contemporary design engineering standards in place within the organization.
I would agree that's appropriate, especially with the pace that a lot of the technology is changing with materials specifically. If you get too many errata, then it gets confusing, which, which spec you should be referencing. So I would agree with you.
One last question, probably more well, it is for our friends from OHM. So as it relates to the specific recommendations that Engineer Humphreys just articulated as part of, I guess, phase 1 of this, or part 1 rather, of this presentation, are these things that you are seeing in other communities that, strive for, not strive, but maintain a standard of excellence? I mean, are these things that are done by communities that are deemed by professionals in your vocation as sort of the jurisdiction that others ought to be emulating?
So, yes, short answer. So we work with a lot of different communities and there's nuances to how things are handled, but what we put in here and the recommendations, based on all our experience, the process that offers the most protection for the city and the highest chance for success when it comes to private development. So we've taken the best of all the communities that we work for and kind of put that together with the recommendation you have in front of you.
Best practices was, of course, the term I was struggling to find. But you think these are best practices that are emulated in other communities that are successful, vibrant?
Yes.
Okay. Excellent. That's all I had. Let me start to my right and end to my left. Councilmember Kamir Sulek, any questions for our guests or Engineer Humphreys regarding this first phase of the presentation on design engineering standards?
Yeah, just a couple real quick. This question was probably already answered, but I was wondering, industry standards, how often do they change? Or is it just as you explained, it's like a living document?
And I would say they all change. They all have their own standards within each industry. So the industries that we touch here, concrete for manholes, plastic pipe for water main, steel. I mean, there's so many different industries that these specifications touch that ultimately are in control of their own. So those are all driven by those different industries. So I say it's living, always continuously changing also.
Okay, all right. And then can you explain the maintenance and guarantee bond?
I'm going to let Marcus, can you do that? I can do it, General, he'll do better.
This one on?
Yeah, okay. Oh, yeah, it's good.
So typically, is it? I don't think so.
Maybe switch with Sally.
Or you can. So typically, when the city accepts public utility or road, anything that's going to be a city asset, require a bond be posted by the developer. 2 years is most common, so that if after you've accepted it, if there's any settlement of the trench, premature failure of the road, that there's a bond in place to cover the replacement cost of that.
How's that calculated? Is it a percentage, depending upon the number of units?
Typically
or road?
50%. Typically 50% of the capital cost, initial installation costs for a period of 2 years.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Dillon, any questions for our guests or Engineer Humphries?
No?
Okay. Mr. Gearbaugh, Councilmember Gearbaugh.
Just a couple, when we talk about putting all these standards in place, and considering it's been 30 years worth of updating that we're doing right now, do you perceive any pushback or concerns coming from our developers in terms of cost impact, time delays, change in behaviors that are unique, or are these consistent with any other communities that are within our area?
I would say the latter. These are consistent with other communities, and we've already started to, roughly implement some of them. And when it comes down to it, the cost for the inspection they were required to do anyway, so we're not really increasing the cost to them. It's just the consultant is working for us, not for the developer. It's a lot more burden on staff time for when a concern comes up for me to go to a developer's engineer to then get all of their documentation. Then I have to read through all their documentation to make a decision, as opposed to calling a team member who's already out there and has all that documentation. So the actual cost when it comes to the developer, I don't envision the cost being substantially different as far as the inspection procedures. And when we get to the next phase of stormwater, I actually think we are reasonable. I do believe in being reasonable with developers. I don't think I've ever in my career drawn a very hard line, and this is the standard I shall be able to check this box. I believe in absolutely working with people, but ensuring that it's built to an infrastructure standard that we, the city, can maintain and ultimately own and live with. So I do not know. That was a long answer to, I do not expect a lot of pushback.
And as you mentioned about having a contractor or the inspection being done more like out of source, I guess that's what I'm going to say, however you described it. How do we assure that our expectations and anticipations are required? I know a lot of the past we've depended upon that being the in-house person because they're so familiar with the city's aspects and all of that. Now when you're having somebody from the outside that may not be the same person every time, how do we assure that those kind of things are caught and reviewed?
Yeah, and that's exactly why I want these standards. So everyone's starting from the same starting point, and we're looking at the same starting point from no matter who's there. So you're not relying on the institutional knowledge of somebody in-house. You're relying on these documents and policies and procedures. And before, we just did not have the time in-house. I mean, to actually have eyes in the field the entire time they're building the water main, to make sure they're putting, because there are components of the water main, even the trench above the water main, that's a critical component of the water main. The bedding around the water main is a critical component. But if you don't physically see that bedding go in, that's the type of material that goes around the water main. You want that water main to be protected and soft, and you want that compacted around it. You want nice sand, you want it compacted around, you don't want stones and stuff sticking in your water main. So, but you can't, once that bedding's buried, you never see it again. Having a full-time inspector on site ensures that that water main's properly bedded and properly installed from 5 feet below grade all the way up to the surface. And before, we don't have the staff capabilities to do that.
And I 100% support
Yeah.
that because I've known in the past where inspections weren't done and we've had problems. The other aspect about materials, as you know, we had the issue on wood. Rosebud, thanks. I was trying to say something, I couldn't remember the words. With materials that were not tested or really weren't for the purpose of which they were used. How do we validate that, even though you say it's a living document, but is there an expectation of which we would have that material has to be approved and reviewed it has to be in actual practice in 5 years or something like that, or what, how do you attend that?
Materials do change, industry standards do change. I mean, in my career, standards have changed. The type of the type of pipe used for sanitary sewer has changed, and the type of pipe for water main has substantially changed in my career, and actually for storm sewer too. And both of those, the difference in both water main and storm sewer have to do with the plastic. Plastic pipes are starting to increase in functionality and beating their competitors. And when I was new, a plastic pipe was so brittle, it chipped. I don't know what you call it, but it cracked the whole way down, and they've made a lot of progress. So I think that's, I'm getting away from what your ultimate question was how do we keep up with the and I'm going to rely on a team of experts outside of here to keep up with that. And that's another good point why we want an outside engineering consultant to help us, because they have experts in materials, they have experts in all kinds of things that we don't have in-house, and they can help us keep up with those so that we are staying with industry standards.
Because I know
I don't
that
know if I
does
answered your
occur with
question.
building, yeah, it does occur with building codes and those that some communities won't adopt until after a certain period of time, even though you may have all new standards. Like we would be 2012, even though there may be 2015 and 2019. I just didn't know if that same thing would apply to this type of engineering standard, so that we knew that what we're doing has been proven.
Right.
Like with that material, it's like we should have known somehow that material was not appropriate for that use, but it was a new material, and so there was no, real
Was it
result.
corrugated metal?
Plastic, non-reinforced, not
Oh.
plastic pipe.
Well, there's a good example of plastic before its time now. Yeah, and so, yeah. Okay, so that,
So
yeah.
just wondering how we would accomplish that. So if you wanted to, are we always going to be at 2022 standards, or are we going to be at like 2017 standards, and then we would adjust every 5 years from that?
And I would say we're somewhere in between. We're definitely going to vet materials. We're not going to be on the leading edge of a brand-new material, and that's where, and I think just working its way through the system of our engineering consultant, and that in itself will help us to vet the newer things and hopefully prevent those types of mistakes in the future.
Thanks. And I honestly admit, we know what standards of materials, but I never really thought how we would have that set up and how we actually monitor that, and that our standards are 30 years old. I just didn't know how often those frequently come by. So I'm glad that you have done this, and this will get us to where we need to be. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Delorco, any initial questions for our city engineer or guests?
Yeah, I want to make sure I understand what's being proposed versus what's historically been done. It sounds to me like you're adding another step where there's an independent review with consultants that we put in place to look at what the developer's proposing before it's accepted. And now, historically, we just didn't have any oversight or any layer of a second set of eyes on the plans. It was just we accepted what the developer proposed and went forward?
Historically, my understanding is that after site plan review, site plan review, the developer got site plan review, and then permits are required for public, let's say, water main and sanitary sewer. That's what I would consider would trigger a construction plan review. And that construction plan review then kind of went in-house through the engineering department, didn't go out to consultants. That whole construction plan review, getting permits through Eagle, was done through the engineering department. And then the
In-house here in the city.
in-house in the city, and maybe leaning on a consultant if needed, but because sometimes a modeling would be needed, like you need a modeling, you need a number to put in the permit, so you would ask the consultant for that only. Excuse me, but then after that, the developer's engineer, and this is built in general conformance with the approved site plan, but I view the construction plan review as very critical because that's when you're actually looking at it in 3D. So that's when you're looking at the profile views of things, that's when you're really seeing where your conflicts come in, because site plan I view as a plan view, you're looking down, bird's eye view. Construction plan, I view it as you're really getting into the nitty-gritty of the 3D of all the utilities.
At the level of planning, the site plans are typically reviewed by Carlisle Wardman.
Yes.
That is a consultant. So the in-house work that you're referring to is not design, it's construction.
And we also are having OHM now do the reviews of the engineering review. So typically you have a consultant on planning doing both engineering and planning reviews. And Carlisle Wortman are our planners. And I would view them as dabbling. They overlap maybe when it comes to traffic and parking type things, but generally planners are doing the planning, and then the engineering at Planning Commission is catching the plan view stuff and identifying the items that will go to construction plan review.
If I can, Mr. Delorco, the specific gap here isn't that it's not being reviewed properly prior to approval. It's how are we ensuring that it's actually built to what they claim they said they were going to build? And
Got
that's-
it. Yeah.
That's our real area, and that's a real hole that Tesh and I have talked about a lot.
Relying on developers taking their word for it that
Yes.
built
Yes.
what you asked for, and that's not always been the case.
Yes, yes.
Staff were doing some inspections and such, but not to the degree or level that we would expect that.
Right,
you
for,
would.
for the, how much money we're talking about in public, we're millions and millions of dollars of public infrastructure. We believe that the review process after that planning phase, where we accept that conceptually this is what it's supposed to be, that practicality, the implementation of that plan has been less than adequate on the city's part to ensure that they're building what they said they were going to build to the quality and degree that they said they were going to build.
Right. We've run into a number of issues where things just weren't completed to satisfaction. There were a list of punch list items that roads didn't come to final completion or final pavement after they were damaged from the construction process. You were talking about water meters being, certificate of occupancy being issued prematurely. These are all things that I see would be a major advantage to having another set of eyes on things before we were to accept what the utility or what the developer was
Right.
moving forward with, because once they're off the hook, they're off the hook. We're not getting them back.
And then it's ours.
Yeah, it's really
forever.
hard.
Yeah,
It's
ours.
really hard. So I definitely am in support of this.
Okay. Thank you, Ben.
Yeah, I think what it boils down to, I think Tesha alluded to this in her opening remarks, which is we relied historically on developers, consultants, and engineers who generally do a decent job. Or especially during Mr. Rubel's tenure with the city of Saline, we provided a lot of those services in-house. And as we look at 2023 and best practices moving forward, we ought to have an independent set of eyes reviewing plans, and we ought to not overburden our staff. And so I think that's the genesis for engaging somebody like OHM to provide this service.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Rice, any questions at this time for our guests or City Engineer Humphreys?
No, none at this time, but thank you for allowing my turn this time.
Nope, quite all right. Glad that you could make it. Engineer Humphreys, please continue.
Okay, well, thank you. And yes, thank you, Mayor Marl. That's exactly, thank you, Ben, for jumping in on that. And that's exactly my point, is that developers should, staff time should not be given to developers for free. They should be paying for our staff time. And that's historically, I think, what started to happen. So my next section has to do with storm sewer, and I will lead this in with just a brief comment, and I think we all are aware that storm sewer regulations are changing. They've changed substantially in the last 20 years. We're seeing that a little bit with our dam. We know our dam is going to be getting increased regulations from storm. The Washtenaw County Water Resource Commissioner has really increased their stormwater regulations over the past 20 years. And I like to think that we, the City of Saline, are, again, reasonable and want to work with both existing people who want to redevelop their property and developers coming in. And Washtenaw County Water Resource Commission has a very stringent, very rigorous requirements for stormwater, and so what we're proposing is something that kind of is in line with their standards, but doesn't go quite as far with all of the requirements for infiltration. And we're putting in, and you'll see in the packet, some standard sheets for calculating storm. So we think this will actually make it easier for developers and everybody. What's expected of us? This allows us to implement best management practices. Allows us to be in compliance with changing regulations, but it also allows us to be flexible when it comes to stormwater regs. Here's a lot of detail on exactly what's changing, and you'll see that in the actual document. And that's the end of that section. I don't know if we want to pause for stormwater section.
Yeah, I think keep going.
Okay, keep going. I will keep going, because then my next section has to do with roads, which I assume will generate a little bit more discussion. So point out real quick that this is one of the big things about the ordinance, and our actual city, like what's in Muni Code, our ordinance, right now has specific design standards, what I would call engineering design standards in it, like the width of the road, a lot of detail that you would typically see in the engineering standards. You would see the ordinance would be the policies, procedures, and then the engineering standards would contain the details. So that's one of the things you will see be when we go through this is that we're recommending to adopt all of these into the engineering standards and ultimately coming back with an ordinance update to reference the engineering standards. The other big change is the narrower roads, which I've talked a little bit about here when at the last work session, I think about a month ago now, we had a work session specifically on implementation of capital improvement projects, and one of them we talked a lot about this Marpool, which is the north-south road, or Marpool, I'm sorry, is the road that runs east-west on the north side of your screen here, and then Woodhill is on the east side. That project itself was one that's had us really start looking at the widths of our road right now, our minimum road width. So we are requiring to build a minimum road width right now, and that's one of the biggest things that we're recommending to change, is that you can go that big if we want, if we think it's necessary, but our minimum width would come down. And the reason why I think that's a good idea is traffic calming. We've seen a little bit of this with our restriping. When you narrow down the road, it slows down the traffic. It reduces the capital cost. You don't have as much material you're putting in, and that same idea, reducing the maintenance. This is the big thing that came up on the screen that you're looking at here, is this particular neighborhood has beautiful mature trees. We were going to lose a lot of trees if we stuck with our 38-foot back-to-back, or 38-foot wide road. So it allows for more, I don't know what you call the right-of-way, it's called something, but between the extension. Yeah, it allows for more room in the extension for the trees to mature and have beautiful trees, which everybody loves trees. Improved hydrant access and flexibility for both reinvestment and new development. Do I have another road slide after this? Okay, oh yeah, I was afraid if I hit the space, I can't go back. So, and this is the summary, yes, of the changes. I get the biggest being, if you go down to the third line down, the width, third and fourth line down. So, sorry, I should say the 38-foot wide is for parking on both sides. So this clarifies all of our existing standards, all of our proposed. So the fourth line down is what currently the Woodhill Marpool 38-foot parking both sides. We're recommending keeping parking both sides, but reducing that down to 34. Or if you wanted to go down to parking on one side, it could go all the way down to potentially 26-foot wide. So this is a summary of the proposed changes here, and that's where I think it's maybe a good spot to pause for additional
I agree. So if you have questions pertaining to either roads or the storm sewer slides that I think are 2 or 3 back, the chair would welcome those at this time. Again, I'll start to my right and to my left. Councilmember Kamir Sulak, any questions for the engineer or our guests from OHM?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So using the Woodhill and Marpool as an example, what are their road widths?
Right now, it's 38 feet is what their current road width is.
Okay, so we have a lot of other roads that are...
It varies a little bit, but 38 and a half, but about 38. It meets our current standard.
But many of our other roads are wider.
Like if there's a center lane, I would say that's typical. The 38 feet of our local street, I should clarify, this is for local streets only. Our major streets being like Maple, yes, that might have a center turn lane or something. So this is proposed for residential, local streets, is what these proposed reduction. And so I think on a couple of new developments, we've limited parking to either one side or maybe just one side. I don't know if we've limited parking in any new development. I'm thinking of, but I'm not sure where some of the private roads, like the Curtis Bluffs might be narrower than this, and I'm not sure, but yeah, so we've only, of all the new development, there's only 3 right now that are public roads proposed right now that we haven't currently accepted, and then there's a lot of these littler ones that have private roads in them that do have narrower roads than this. So we do have narrower roads than this around town, but they're likely private.
Okay. Okay. So this will be going into effect, so this won't impact any of our developments that are going in at the moment?
It won't impact any proposed developments at this time, but it does give us a lot more flexibility in the capital reinvestment in our current streets. So it gives us more flexibility in those capital projects that we want to reinvest in our streets. It allows us more flexibility, so we could potentially narrow the road to save the trees and maybe limit the parking to one side, save some cost on the project.
Okay. All right. Looks fairly straightforward to me. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Kamir Sulak. Mayor Pro Tem Dillon?
Thank you. So narrow roads are one of those things that it's a love-hate relationship. I get there's the whole traffic calming. That's something we talk about every month when I go to Andalina Farms because their roads are not built to our standards. And they always make a joke about it that we like wide, fast roads in Saline.
That's interesting.
And so I get that part of it. First, just to clarify, the streets with parking both sides, it says proposed 34. Ours said 24, the printout. So I'm assuming 34 is correct, and you do
yes.
not want that big of a jump, because I was like,
No.
wow, that was a huge jump.
Apologies. No, you must.
No,
I
no, no,
think,
that's
yes,
okay.
This is the correct, yes. what's
Okay,
on
so
your
that just
screen.
clarifies that part for me. So I guess my concern with, I can see this for new development, for redevelopment of established areas. It makes me a little weary because especially you start looking at neighborhoods with older homes, smaller driveways, single garage, where people are always planning to have a car on the street. So when you're going to have parking on one side, you're going to lose one whole side of your road because everybody's going to park there. Whereas before, they could stagger and you could sort of do the back and forth thing. So that's something I just want to make sure that we're mindful of what is the requirement of the homes for parking on site versus street parking. And then those incidents where we have those times when we have snow emergencies or they need access to fire equipment, have fire equipment access, things like that. It's just making sure that we're thinking down the road, all those what ifs of how that piece of it works. And so at the end of the day, I'm obviously not a road or parking expert, so I think it's something that we're gonna have to sort of figure out what's gonna be the best for us. I do know that that's always been sort of the delineation between public and private roads was that private roads were always generally built smaller so that they could fit more homes or do whatever on their lots. And so I guess if we extend that into the community, I understand that, like I said, from that new build aspect. From existing, it's a little bit different. I do want to touch base first on trees. Just because you mentioned it with this project for the Marpool. I'm always concerned about that. We went through this issue before. I think I've made mention of this is, mature trees. Everybody loves mature trees. Trees don't last forever. And so finding that balance between trees that are beyond their useful life and, they're too big and now they're ripping up sidewalks. They're into people's front yards. They're up to foundations of homes. They're out under our roads. So, I want to make sure that we're looking at that and we're not just save the trees as a general blanket statement. So I want to be very, very mindful of that because the other piece going into that is sidewalks. That's one of, I think, our biggest deficits in this community is that our sidewalks are not consistent. We have sidewalks that are like 3.5 feet wide, and then we have non-motorized pathways that are all sort of, so if we can figure out a way that, okay, this will be our standard moving forward, and anytime a road is done, we build into fixing those sidewalks to make them more accessible. And I'm not saying that's going to be the case for every development, every project, but there are some community or some neighborhoods in which they have, basically useless sidewalks for those people that have mobility issues or such. And so being sort of mindful of that and kind of reaching into that ADA requirement phase.
Okay.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Gearbo, any questions?
Just kind of an observation. Well, one of the other things, I noticed it says 60 foot on this printout too, instead of 66 feet
Okay.
for minimum right-of-way.
Look at that,
So, but
please.
we're maintaining 66
Yes.
feet no matter what, correct?
Yes.
All right. Because I know that's always been an issue in the past with right-of-ways. For me, I know one of the concerns that had come up when we had talked about maintaining the width of these streets has been maintenance in terms of being able to maintain and plow the streets. Now with the narrowing of that, and if you have two parking on it, I'm concerned what that's going to mean in terms of, how do you maintain those streets, how do you keep them open, and that, just as Councilmember Dillon had mentioned. But what about delivery trucks and that type of thing? I know examples of streets where cars are parked on both sides, and you're narrow enough trying to get through there that delivery trucks can't make it, and in fact have to back up or go around because of that problem. If we make them even narrower, we're going to make that a regular type of occurrence. I know the idea of narrower streets is more with the idea of maintenance and less cost and such, but when do we get to the issue of traffic flow, accessibility, and those kind of things, and how we would rationalize those? So that's one of the concerns that I would have, because I know when we talked about some of the subdivisions that were developed, they were developed with private roads, but they were built to city standards, and then we took them on, that they didn't maintain, stay private. Now that we're going to go even smaller with narrower roads, that was part of the issue, was maintaining them, and those were always the concerns that DPW used to address, and that was what our former engineer and community development planner did. So those are my concerns with understanding as we narrow things, and even with trees, making wider lawn extensions and such, what that's going to mean in terms of just all the maintenance and everything associated with it. And then lastly is just, when you mentioned a minimum size, your minimum size is going to be what you present right here as 26, 34, and 22?
Yes, that's what we currently are proposing for the minimum, and it could go larger than that, yes.
Right, we're not going to discourage, if a developer wanted to make more, we wouldn't discourage it. Okay. All right. Yeah, there's just a lot of review that I've done in the past with that and understanding, and I know what you're talking about minimum size roads, but again, it's going to be that issue of accessibility, and with what's shifting in traffic and delivery trucks and all of those things, I'm just a bit concerned about making sure that we can continue to provide these services or allow that to occur.
Do you want to take a moment and respond to his initial question and concern?
I think to talk about, to go back just one more step to even what Councilmember Dillon was speaking of, is that in an existing neighborhood, we would be proposing, like for the Marpole Woodhill, probably going down to the 34-foot and still keeping parking on both sides. But then that comes to what Dean's concern is, which is then are you making this narrow area that a delivery truck can't even get through? And my intent when I asked OHM, and I'll let them speak a little bit further on the behalf of the actual traffic templates, was that that did not occur, that you can get at least a car or large truck through the center. In fact, if you actually line it up, I think in theory you can get two cars, you can actually get in these widths, you can get two cars parked and two cars going. Without the stripes, people are very nervous to do that, but a lot of times you can all fit. You only need a 10-foot lane. I mean, I think these ends up being very narrow lanes, but in theory, this minimum width would fit two cars and two cars driving all at once. So a delivery truck would go through, but it would have absolutely appear that only one can go through at a time if you had cars like all parked up for a graduation party or something.
And perhaps maybe Lewis streets and some of those other streets are narrower that cause that problem, but I do know that was an issue on Lewis Street just this past couple months.
Mm-hmm. And as far as the trees and the maintenance, if you
But
don't
that doesn't
mind,
address when you have a giant
DPW Director
garbage
Searles, I'm going to ask him to speak on behalf of that.
Yeah, I understand.
I'm going to have Larry speak on behalf of the trees and the maintenance.
Yeah, please, Larry.
So to speak on the maintenance, our issue with cars parked on the roads, for the most part, doesn't matter how wide the road is. We're coming back, we're leaving windrows where the cars were parked. It extends how long we have to go. If we were to narrow a road in a redevelopment area, it would be with the consideration of not two-side parking, right? We would not narrow it down. The decision would be made to be narrowing it down to a choke point where we could not maintain it. Emergency service couldn't get through it. But what would happen, and I don't know if Tasha talked to you guys about the Marpole, we're going to initially, to do that exact road that was planned, we lose 40% of the trees the day we start, and then probably another 10 to 15% in die-off. That'll cause us a major issue after the fact with the ones we wish we could save. If we can just bring the road in a little bit, we won't be changing the characteristics of that subdivision that much, whether it's limited to one side parking or both on the narrow end. I think it's just a toolbox. So when we go into design, we're not spending money designing something that's not going to be accepted as proposed. I don't think anyone would be happy with the original Marpole with losing that much canopy at once. So Cars parked causes us time, but if we were to narrow it down to the point to where it would be one-side parking, we'd still have the ability to get around the cars. And then if it was obviously, through administration and council, you get to vet the plan before we roll forward on a redevelopment. But the maintenance on the trees after the fact is kind of a burden, as much of a burden as the on-street parking. But we have that, and our residents want that.
Is Marpool and, well, some of the newer streets more of an issue than some of the older streets? I'm just trying to understand why we've done other streets without having to impact the trees, and now, in some cases, now it seems like this is a bigger issue than we've ever had before.
I think it's species over on Marpool. I really believe it. They're super large canopies. The trunks are big. I don't know what, this is actually the first one that this kind of tree loss would be through all of the jobs since I've been here. We haven't had this big of an issue with that many trees having to come out.
Because where we've had the problems before is like Monroe and Henry Street, when those were widened, new curbs and gutters were put in, those trees had to go because we were expanding the road.
Yep.
I just didn't know, since we planted those trees with the road the size it is right now, why that's an issue. And
this is the first one that this issue highlighted itself.
Thank you.
Mr. Delorco, any questions pertaining to roads or storm sewer that were just discussed as part of Engineer Humphreys' presentation?
I think most of them were asked.
Okay, very good. Councilmember Rice?
I just wanted to state that I just emailed council and some of our directors here a really cool graphic about the width versus the size of the average car, and this graphic shows a 35-foot width, which would give just about 13 feet if there was a car passing. So a 13-foot wide truck and a car could pass at the same time. So we're talking about 1 foot shorter is our minimum with both sides of the street parking. So it's tight, but this visual, I think, helps depict the fact that we're not going to lose any, like Larry said, emergency services or, even if a truck was parked there, I think at 34 feet, it would be tight. But it still seems like it's a doable number with both cars, both sides of the street parking. Aside from that, no other questions. I do think perhaps 26 feet, we don't have a good example of that, but I do also have some concerns about the width of the street. My curiosity is this sort of the standard for neighborhoods in cities, the residential streets in cities? Are these numbers that you're proposing the standards?
I'm proposing these for our local roads, which would be residential roads, and I'm going to defer to OHM on how they compare to other, other communities in Washtenaw County.
So, yeah, these are closer to what surrounding communities use for the residential. Mostly it's a traffic calming feature, but even with parking, you generally assume that a car is 8 feet wide, and you try to maintain 9-foot passing lanes. So in many of these cases, it's going to be tight, like you said, but it's definitely still there for emergency services. You can still get 2 cars to pass each other, even with cars on the edges. So this does match up with other surrounding communities, both in Washtenaw and Oakland counties. I looked at a number of communities around here.
Thank you.
Tesha or Engineer Humphreys, we've got about 10 minutes, and of course we have a hard stop at 7. Do you want to keep going through the, why don't you try to finish your presentation with our guests from OHM, and for my colleagues' benefit, this conversation may have to continue at a future meeting, either as a discussion item or either as a special session or as a work session, but we'll see if we can get through. We'll try to get through as much as we can.
Okay, well, I've only got a couple left. So I had minor updates, and I just lumped in together. This was just pulling out a couple of the major changes, allowing the plastic pipe for the water main, eliminating the truss pipe for the sanitary sewer, and requiring the manhole wrap. This is a wrap that goes around the outside of our manholes. This is something that is a slight increase increase in cost, but I think it'll save it. We have a lot of I&I, which is infiltration and inflow and infiltration in our sanitary sewer system, so that helps to prevent that. And I think, yeah, we're at the end here. My next steps were council approval. So our goal is we're aiming to have something in your hands at the beginning of June, and looking at giving you a few weeks before we're actually taking it probably to the June 19th council meeting. I think the next meeting after that would be July 10th, but aiming for one of those two meetings for you to have the full document at the beginning of June, to either get questions, come talk to me, have a meeting, send me in writing, whatever it may be, or if we need further discussion, like you suggested, another work meeting, maybe once you get your hands on the full document, you'll make a decision on which way that needs to go. And that's what I was anticipating, taking the council approval updates first, and then next step is the ordinance updates, which would come right just so they coincide with one another, and working with Community Development Director Harrington to do that. And I think that's all I have.
Very good. So
Yeah.
just for your edification, and hopefully we can get to a point where not only the policy, but the ordinances will receive unanimous support from my colleagues on city council. If we're aiming for that second meeting in June, just so that you're aware, there'll be at least 2 of us out of the country on that date.
Oh.
So that particular council meeting will be at most 5 members.
Oh, okay.
Okay? So just,
July, maybe 10th it is.
so again,
Yeah.
I'll leave that to your judgment and staff.
wanted
but
to get it wrapped up
Yep,
before
if
the
you
4th
want
of
to
July, but-
change the date, we can certainly do that.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Again, I need you to exercise brevity, folks, because we have less than 10 minutes. So again, I'll start to my right and end to my left. Councilmember Kamara Sulek, any additional questions for our guests or Engineer Humphreys?
No additional questions at this time.
Very good. Mayor Pro Tem Dillon?
Hey, just really quickly, going back to the chart, I apologize, there was one thing that talked about border area. It's currently 10 feet, and we're not, so it says no change to that, but then on yours, it says eliminate.
Oh, what did we decide the border area was?
So border area, what exactly is
margin.
that?
We were going to eliminate the requirement of,
That ends up being whatever it is based on the right-of-way is 66 foot, so that just happens. You have 5-foot sidewalks, depending on the width of the road that's selected.
So I'm sorry, can we just step it back? What exactly does border area mean?
It's a margin.
The margin, okay,
It's the margin behind the back of curb to the right of way.
okay,
And the 10 feet is really kind of arbitrary, because right now, if you put a 38-foot road in there, you can't make.
You can't even make it.
66-foot right of way anyways. Which
Okay.
is why we're proposing to eliminate it.
okay.
It'll just be whatever is between the back of curb and the right of way. And we did put in a requirement that the roads must be centered in the right of way. So whatever is left will just be divided equally.
Okay, that's fine. Then just very quickly, the Marpole project, when is that scheduled to happen?
well, right now, I believe it's lacking some funding, and it's, I think in our capital plan for 25, maybe we're,
Okay, so we don't have to, I mean, they're not waiting, that project's not waiting on this decision.
no, in fact, the next step with that project is to have a public meeting to let them know what's going on with the project. That's absolutely the next step with that project, is to have a public meeting, because it's not happening this summer. We do have good design plans, but this, like Larry said, the tree impact is why we need to have the public meeting. So the next step with that is public meeting, and then figure out how it's going to be funded and when it moves forward.
Okay. I guess my last thing about the tree part of that is that I would like to see like an independent arborist come in and like evaluate those trees, because I don't want to build this project around saving trees that in 2 years we find out, by the way, we need to take them out. I just think that needs to be part of the process so that the public understands too where they are in their lifespan. Thank you.
Very good. Councilmember Gearbox, some quick questions?
Yeah, just on the stormwater, we've had issues with, we've had issues with wetlands in the industrial park and concerns with Eagle and involving that. How will we improve that aspect? That's one thing to follow up on, because we had a situation where Eagle came in and interrupted and stopped work on a project because of the way the land was and everything else that, as you mentioned, stormwater. And then the other one, you'd mentioned plastic pipe, private versus public, allowing it on private, but not allowing it on public. I'm just curious as to why would we allow that if there's a risk component to it, and would we
I apologize if I said something to the plastic for private versus public. The plastic pipe, the water main is intended to be used for like our actual public water main. Right now it is currently, and maybe that's, currently a building code does allow plastic pipe to be used inside the house, and I believe between the curb stop and the building. And so you're right, our current standards allows plastic pipe for private. I'm proposing we allow it on the public side also.
Because it says allows for ADS N12 plastic pipe to be used in private application.
Oh, and that's the stormwater. So you're on the,
yeah.
Sorry, you're on the
Sorry,
stormwater. You said stormwater when you started, I went to water main. So that is the, the public, that's a good question. Yes, so that's how it is.
Not to answer it now,
right
but you might want to
yes.
investigate. I'm just
Yeah.
curious, because when we're talking plastic pipe.
I understand your
in-
question now.
in
Yes,
Rosebud,
I understand your question now.
I just want to
Yep.
understand how that.
Yep,
works.
okay, good point, yes.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Gearba. Councilmember Dell'Orco, any quick questions before we wrap up?
Nothing further.
Okay. Councilmember Rice.
Nothing further.
Excellent, okay. Engineer Humphris, our guest from OHM, do you feel like you got
Thank you for your time.
valuable feedback?
Absolutely.
And excellent. Well, then we will proceed with you making the necessary changes, providing some additional documentation, and then maybe voting on this, if not in late May, then certainly in June.
Okay.
Excellent.
Or July, maybe.
We do need to entertain a motion to excuse the absence of Councilmember CO. If somebody be willing to make such a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Gearba. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Kamara Sulek. I'll get you on the next one, Mr. Dell'Orco. All those in favor of excusing the absence, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. And now a motion to adjourn this work meeting at 6:58 PM.
So moved.
Moved by Gearba. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded again by Kamara Sulek. All those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, meeting is adjourned. We will begin promptly in 2 minutes. Okay.
I think that's true.
Terry, you good? Okay.
Yeah, right?
I'd like to call the Saline City Council meeting to order. If you'd please rise and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much and good evening. For the public, or the audience's benefit, there are copies of the agenda on the back table along with a sign-in sheet and hearing devices if they're required. I'll call the roll. From council, we have council members Kamara Sulak, Del Orco, Gearbaugh, Rice, Mayor Pro Tem Dillon, and Mayor Marl. Absent tonight is council member Seo. From staff, we have City Manager O'Toole, Clerk Royal, Community Development Director Harrington, City Engineer Humphreys, Parks and Rec Director Scruggs, Wastewater Treatment Superintendent Briggs, and City Treasurer Cole. At this time, the chair would entertain a motion to approve the agenda. I guess I'll take a motion to approve as amended. I think there might be some additional modifications to the consent agenda. I think one or two items may be removed, but primarily for the public's benefit, let me note two changes that occurred between when the agenda was first produced on Wednesday afternoon and today. So the Charter Review Working Group has been removed. We will ask for authorization at our next regular meeting on May the 1st, and then one citizen appointment was added, Paul Merrifield to HDC, which is agenda item 23-103. So at this time, again, the chair would entertain a motion to approve the agenda as amended unless there are additional changes.
I'll approve as amended with, I'd like under discussion, agenda changes.
Okay, so that will be the third bullet under discussion is agenda changes. Is there a second then to that motion to?
I think there's others to add to that. I would like to remove.
Well, we'll get to,
okay.
excuse me, we'll get to that when we get to the consent agenda. As the motion reads, any item can be removed at that time. And so if you'd like to remove an item, or if anybody else would like to remove additional items, we can certainly do that.
Okay.
Is there a second to Mr. Gearbaugh's motion?
Second.
Seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Dillon. Thank you. All those in favor of approving the agenda as submitted signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. The motion carries unanimously. Is there a motion now to excuse the absence of our colleague Jack Seo?
So moved.
Moved by Kamara Sulek. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Del Orco. All those in favor of excusing the absence signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. The motion carries unanimously. We come now to citizen comments on agenda items. Under the Open Meeting Act, any citizen may come forward at this time, make comment or question on an item that appears on this agenda. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Anyone who would like to speak is requested but not required to state his or her name and address for the record. Are there any citizen comments on agenda items? All you need to do is come to the podium. We would welcome your comments, and you will be limited to 3 minutes.
Good evening. Chang Ming Fan, local residents, local social entrepreneur. I'm going to talk a little bit about related with student presentation. Just see the agenda today. Is that okay or after?
If you'd like to speak to the Youth Council presentation, that's perfectly fine.
Yes, it's related. So can I wait for both ladies and go to present? I'm part-time or temporary sub-teacher in Ann Arbor, Saline area. I'm really just surprised how powerful, smart, and mature our students here in both Ann Arbor and Saline. So therefore, which is the topic what I presented several weeks ago, give the name is called SAYAM, S-A-Y-A-M. Y stands for young, A, ambassador. So SAYAM is Saline area young ambassadors. As this city been built internationally, we have sister cities. And so as the tradition, younger people, Generation Z, as I said, much more powerful, mature. So with 2 parents and 10 students, K-12, which is group to visit different countries. Whatever funding is different story, but we can do it. Why we have to do it? Because we have no other choice. Our world right now is full of gunpowders, full of hatred against each other, nations to nations. How can we bridge this link? We are not going to click and solve the big problem. We have to send the ambassadors. We have to send the younger people visit there, Taiwan or China. So just like Mr. Anto, do I have 10 seconds?
You have 49 seconds.
Thank you. The 15th President of the United States, no, of the University of Michigan, which is I'm the alumni, and he said that the city of Ann Arbor hosts that President JFK. He had a program, as you all know, youth group, what do you call that, Peace Corps. So now the time is coming. We have to let the younger people bridge the link. Maybe have to go to the war zone. But I think go to Taiwan and China to let the younger people just visit. That will break the ice. So 5 seconds? 2 seconds. The hope is peace. May peace prevail this earth, the only planet we live. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there additional citizen comments on agenda items?
Good evening. I'm here to talk about marijuana ordinance 855. I'm not opposed to medical marijuana or marijuana dispensaries, period. What I want to see is us make sure they stay away from the parks. They have to stay away from kids at schools, 1,000 feet. I don't think it's unreasonable, and it's going to zone anybody out from continuing to put dispensaries in here. Right now, we have one open, another one's getting ready to open up. That's probably about as many as Saline can handle. I don't think it's too much. We kind of put the cart before the horse, so to speak, when we started taking applications, and we didn't have an outline of where do we want these, how can we keep our kids safe, our schools safe, our parks safe, and we left our parks out. And this was approved by planning commissions. I believe, Brian, it was unanimous, correct?
I believe so.
Yes, and they even admitted, we probably should have done this a while back. So please support this tonight, 250 from all parks, and let's keep our kids safe, our playing field safe, and our museum and other great amenities that we take care of in our city. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there additional citizen comments on agenda items?
Mary Hess, I wasn't going to speak tonight, but I agree with him.
Thank you for that comment. One last call. Any citizen comments on agenda items this evening? Then let me defer to the city clerk. Were there any comments provided in advance of tonight's meeting in which the individual wanted their remarks read at this time? The record will reflect there are none. Very good. Then we move on to the first of two presentations. First up is an annual report from our Youth Council. I'm going to let Director Scruggs begin and introduce the leadership of our Parks Commission. At the conclusion of their remarks, if Councilmember Camaro-Sulak, who's the liaison of the Youth Council, would like to share some thoughts, we would welcome that. And I would ask both the presenters for the Youth Council presentation and the subsequent presenters for risk mitigation to try to limit their remarks to about 5 to 10 minutes. And then, of course, we may have questions, comments from council at the end.
I'll be very brief. I am just happy to present Jennifer Gage. She is our chair for this year. She's a graduating senior. You can come on up. And she's done a fantastic job for the past few years, especially during COVID when we were virtual, kind of kept things going. And I'm not going to steal her thunder, so she has a lot of really great things to say tonight, and I know she's going to limit her time. So, Jennifer Gage.
Very good.
Thank you so much. Good evening. Thank you all so much for having us. We're very excited to be here. I'm Jennifer. I'm here with Nancy Gage. She serves as our secretary, and we are very happy to present what we've been doing for this past academic year.
Very good. Jennifer, for our benefit, will you pull that microphone just a little bit closer to you and make sure the green light is illuminated at the base? Should have a little green light right there.
All right.
There you go.
That?
Perfect.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so yes, we are the Saline Youth Council. So we have two kind of main functions that we like to do. One is that we like to learn about our city, so we like to learn about our other functions, our other committees, how all of these work together. We have had actually several committee leaders come and see us, so that's one of the things that we've been doing is we've just been learning about the city. And then other stuff that we like to do is we like to have service opportunities and provide our own service opportunities, so we get out in the city and do our own activities. So this was in June, this is kind of where we're starting. We went to the Saline High School and we picked up some trash along the parking lots. We had noticed, since we do go to school there, that there was a lot of trash, so we went and picked that up. We actually collected a significant amount, so we were very happy to get that out of the way. We also, more than once, we try to keep this about annual. We do yard cleanups for our seniors. This is what we did this year. There's also a large amount of leaves, and this has been really great. Those who have been receiving our help have been really happy, and we've been really happy to know them. They've all been really nice people, and it's been really rewarding. Nancy Gage plays flute at the senior center. This is a connection that we made through SYC, so she comes about every week, every week, and she plays for them. We've participated in the Saline Holiday Parade twice. This was us this year. We've held the banners, the front and back, and that was really fun. We enjoyed being a part of that. And then this is kind of what we're most proud of is our organizational improvements. So over the past years, mostly due to COVID, we have had some participation issues and a few organizational glitches. So one is that we've had actually an increased number of members. We were starting to lose a lot, and this year we gained a lot, and to have that retention, we have tried to become more organized. So we now have a Google Calendar for all of our events that we've planned to try and keep that all together, make sure that our people are coming. And most importantly, we're really happy about this, is we had bylaw changes to hopefully have increased participation and attendance. We've made it a little bit more strict, but we have seen a really good outcome. Our members have been very happy with it as well. What we just did recently is we always do Saline Youth of the Year. This year, Sophia Wilman is our Saline Youth of the Year, so we're very proud to announce her. And then we have two current projects, is one that we're having a toy drive. Those toys will be going to Mott's. And then we're also on April 2nd, we're going to have an Earth Day cleanup where we'll be going to Curtis Park and picking up some of the trash there. And that concludes all of that. Thank you.
Very good. Excellent presentation. You stay put for just a moment because there may be some questions, comments best addressed by you in your capacity as chair of the Youth Council. Councilmember Kamara-Sulik, is there anything you'd like to add as the liaison to the group at this time?
Most definitely. I'm very proud to be around these wonderful young adults. They have such a strong sense of volunteerism, and they're great ambassadors to the community, helping, showing that they want to be involved, reaching out the way their organization, and actually the bylaw changes, updates, I think are a gold standard for the city. And lastly, both Nancy and Jennifer have been strong leaders the last several years. And a lot of that, the work that they do, and all the high-tech organization, and that's kind of Greek to me, has really helped keep the communication and bonded this group. And I see this lasting and moving forward with a strong youth council for the next several years. And I'll leave it at that.
Very good.
Thank you.
We appreciate those comments and your service. Are there questions or comments for our guests? Mr. Delorco, Councilmember Delorco?
I just wanted to say the city of Saline is lucky to have you, so keep up the good work. We're very glad that we're having young people get involved in local government. It's a great learning experience, and you guys are providing wonderful things for the community.
Thank you so much. We appreciate that.
Mayor Pro Tem Dillon?
Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you for what you're doing for our community. We really appreciate it. What I really see from your presentation is that this is a student-led organization, and that I really appreciate, because it's really easy to sit up here and direct people. And so it's really nice to see your involvement, your commitment to the organization. And so I really do appreciate that. And at any time, if the Youth Council, if there's some way in which we can support you, please don't hesitate to come back before us and let us know.
Thank you.
Councilmember Rice.
Thank you so much for your presentation and for all the work that you're doing. What are your goals for the upcoming year?
I will be graduating the upcoming year, but hopefully going forward is we would like to keep our group strong, so keep our attendance going, and have more concrete volunteer opportunities. So we have been trying to keep things a little bit annual. So our senior center, yard cleanups, book drives, we did that last year. We are hoping actually to keep that going forward. So keep things more annual, more concrete.
Great, thanks so much.
Thank
Good luck
you.
with the rest of your senior year.
Thank you.
Anything else from the group? Mr. Gearbaugh?
I'd just like to extend an invitation. The Saline Area Historical Society would love to have more participation with our youth and whatever, and so if there's opportunities, I believe the board and the president would be more than welcome to help with you all to establish something of that nature. So let that for Carla and for Mr. Camaro Sulak in the future. So thank you. Glad you're doing these.
Jennifer, in all candor, that's one of the better presentations that I've heard this calendar year. Short, succinct, to the point, yet informative. So I appreciate that, and that approach will serve you well in the years to come. So thank you for your leadership and your time tonight. We very much appreciate it. And as Mayor Pro Tem Dillon said, if there's anything that this group collectively or we as individuals can do to support you or the Youth Council, don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, very good. We are going to move on then to our second presentation of the evening, which is an update from our risk mitigation working group. And I believe that will entail Councilmember Gearbaugh and the risk mitigation facilitator, Lori Champion. As soon as the presentation is up, I would invite both of them to the podium. Oh, Terry is? Excuse me.
With our help.
Good afternoon. So, Ben, do I push this forward?
Yeah,
okay.
Just hit the space bar.
That's fine, thank you. This is our risk mitigation group presentation. The risk mitigation started back in 2020. All the members have stayed the same. I came in and Al left. That might have been good or bad, but.
It was good.
And so this is our executive summary, and you have a copy of all of this. Right now, we are looking at our highest priorities, which there are 35 of. We have high priorities of 26 and priority of 9. And then we have additional risks that are not in that high category, which are, it's very hard to explain, but they're labeled down so that we, as the ones are corrected or not really corrected, but the risk has been defined or been conquered or completed. There we go. The risk has been completed. We move other items that have down and other ones go up, because we are always adding. Seems like every time we meet, we add, but we never take them away. So these are our highest risk. So in 2023, the refresh included 5 new department heads. So part of this was going in and talking to those 5 new department heads and adding the risk that they saw as being important to these categories. We had previously interviewed 61 people from all over the city and added those into this risk. Currently, we have 5 top risks that are on this that we have decided were the highest priority that we are working on. And as we go through them, every time after we meet, I send out an updated spreadsheet to department heads quarterly, and then when they submit them back, I bring them back to the risk mitigation group so that we can see where the progress is being made. So since we started, we have completed 5, and although there's only 5, they are very separate items, so there's a lot under this 5. And then finally, it is the risk mitigations request that we continue to meet for quarterly throughout 2023, and then give you a final presentation in 2024.
Very good. Chairperson Gearbaugh, anything you'd like to add to Clerk Royal's presentation?
I believe there's a couple more slides.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's all right.
I was looking at mine. So these were the 5 top risks. And then these were the risks as they 2021 versus 2023. And this is the final recommendation saying that we would like this to go, continue to meet quarterly throughout 2024.
Very good. And that motion is on the consent agenda tonight for
It
council
is.
consideration.
Yeah.
Very good. Mr. Gearbout, anything you'd like to add at this time?
One of the things that we've looked at is, and we have added additional risk because the new set of eyes have looked at it. Staff are working on these, trying to address a lot of the concerns and things that we brought up. Because of a number of things coming up, and even in with our top 5 risk concerns that we look at, capital improvement planning and transparency. Prime example of that was the work meeting prior to this, where Tesha presented the whole plan for engineering guidelines and design process, and that's addressing that. We are talking about our critical infrastructure. The fire department actually is undergoing its own risk assessment and review, and discussions are happening on that, which was helped trigger as part of this, but I think it was also something that was fully adopted by the fire board to deal with that. And then, of course, we're always talking about the wastewater treatment plant, and as we all know, significant improvement has happened on that in terms of what we're planning for the new plan and so forth. So a number of these large risks that we've had a concern are well underway. The other ones are in process. We're waiting for some more plans to be developed in that. And when Ms. Royal was mentioning the other 66, I think, or whatever the number was, there's a number of risks that we monitor or suggest be monitored that have not reached the level of the concern of which we believe, are either catastrophic or the likelihood of them occurring. So when you look at those type of aspects, there may be a concern that may be very, very limited in the aspect of it occurring, and so we may not be addressing that immediately, but we do have it on the list to maintain. And I feel like this has been a welcome project for not only the city and identified things, but I'm hoping that staff have felt that this gives them some guidelines to what we as a group and the council expect to be addressed in terms of dealing with concerns and issues.
Very good. Facilitator Lori Champion, is there anything that you would like to add at this time? We appreciate your attendance tonight, and more importantly, your leadership and support since 2020.
You're so kind. I just want to say to the city and to leadership team across the board, Terry, for all her work. You have done something here in not only creating this risk profile, but also sustaining it and using it to help make decisions and to prioritize time and resources that very few cities of any size have accomplished. And I hope it's been beneficial, that it's provided some common sense insight into what some of the issues are, and that, as we've already seen, change has been made, progress has been made. So I want to thank you for that.
Very good.
Yep.
If I can piggyback on those comments, I want to go back to the early days of this initiative, 2020, when we interviewed then city labor attorney Steve Gerard, who has subsequently retired. And as many of you know, and many of you worked with Steve, is a consummate professional, somebody who worked at a very high level doing labor and employment law for the better part of 30 years, working for large municipalities and small. And I remember speaking to him after his interview, and he said, I've worked for so many clients, I'm not aware of any municipality ever doing an initiative as comprehensive and in-depth and as holistic as this. He said they should, and he said you should also note that you're probably not going to get a lot of public praise and affirmation for doing this, but you certainly should, because this is an initiative that will benefit your organization in innumerable ways, and I think it already has. So, yes, thank you for that. And again, thank you for your leadership. This process would not have been possible without your participation, Lori. Happy to entertain questions. Please note that specific components of this risk mitigation initiative or evaluation cannot be disclosed for public review or dissemination for obvious reasons. But if you have sort of high-level questions or comments, I'm sure the city clerk, our facilitator, or our working group chair would be happy to entertain those. Let me start with Councilmember Kamara Sulik and then jump to Mayor Pro Tem Dillon.
Yeah, real quick. So for the, Mr. Gerbal, you were talking about there's other items that are on, that aren't as high level. Is there a process of watching over them before they become priorities?
Yeah, and we've developed and Ms. Champion can deal with it too, we've developed basically what do you want to call it, a work list and matrix. The matrix identifies where we think they sit as a priority, And then we have periodically reviewed them to determine whether or not we feel they need to move up or go down. But we're also trying to make sure that all of those issues are mapped out so that we have an understanding of when they've been undertaken, when do they anticipate the plan to be completed, so that those issues are being addressed and followed in terms of some type of a project plan to make sure that they aren't dropped off the list. If something becomes more of a concern or an issue, should be moved up quicker, and staff are reviewing those as part of their regular requirements,
Okay.
I believe, in Missile Tool. Yep.
Okay, perfect. This is really, seems seemingly very complex, but I'm confident that with staff looking over it, that we'll be able to keep that matrix.
Yeah, there is a lot of, and, thanks to Ms. Champion and to Terry for monitoring and maintaining this. There's a lot of information and trying to verbalize it and pull it together and actually make it sound somewhat, less complex has been all to them and their work on how they've been doing it, and the assistance of our citizen members.
Great. Thank you for all you've done.
Mayor Pro Tem Dillon.
Thank you. Thank you very much for bringing this forward. It is, as the mayor stated, it's sometimes hard to take a really hard look at yourself and really kind of look at some of the ugly, but that's how you move forward. So what I wanted to ask, and I'm not sure this might actually go to the city manager, is that, so what we're going to do now is extend this group for another year. This is sort of an initiative that's going to live on in perpetuity because we're always going to be adding to it. There's always going to be something there that doesn't fall off. So will the group continue on in a different form? Is this something that your office would take over at some point? Do we look at 5 years from now, we sort of do another really hard look again?
Yeah, I think in the conversations that we've had, the eventual transition will be to my office to manage this, because risk management isn't a document, it's a culture. And it's making sure that our department heads are taking this information and making it a part of their regular decision-making, and then reporting on where those risks fall and how that matrix is changing on a regular basis. To your point, I do expect as we transition to that becoming a responsibility of my office, in the future, just like any other documents that we have, we need to have a regular check-in point, and whether we decide that it's once a year, once every 2 years, or once every 5 years, we set that standard up and we move forward and hold ourselves accountable to it.
Thank you very much.
Could I add a good practice or best practice? I agree with what the city manager has said, is for it to be owned by the leadership team, management, but for there to be periodic reviews. So as the city manager has said, and that includes periodically, whether it's every 1 year, 2 years, whatever is appropriate, I would encourage convening a group so you get that fresh eyes look at what some of the issues are. It's a good healthy practice.
Thank you.
My apologies, Mr. Delorico, I failed to recognize you earlier as a long-term member of the committee and working group. Is there anything you'd like to add at this time?
Mainly that this has been a great opportunity for anyone that's worked on this group to become familiar with the way in which we conduct business here in the local government, and it's provided us with insight into how we can improve as an organization. And I would like to believe that identifying these risks has translated to our department heads welcoming the information and being able to use it to their advantage as a tool, not as any kind of reprimand or punishment. And I would certainly welcome the opportunity on any feedback from either the city manager or staff as to how this information is being received, how it's working out in their departments, and if there's anything we can do better. Out of all the committees I've served on since in my tenure as council, this has been the most time-consuming, labor-intensive group that I've had the honor to serve on, and I feel like it's been a worthwhile endeavor. So any way we can continue to make this stronger is certainly something I'm interested in.
Very good. Thank you for that. Provide you an opportunity if you have, make a comment or ask any questions if you have them, Councilmember Rice.
Yeah, just a quick question. And I realize that there's nuances to all of this, and some of it is just assessments or time requirements, but have you made attempts to attach dollar amounts to any of these actions or any of these outcomes?
Do you want to show them impact scale? They're at the back of the presentation. you'll see a page that talks about the impact scale. All of the risks that were identified were assessed first based on likelihood. How likely are they to occur? And secondly, on impact. How much harm could they cause? Impact was defined in a number of ways, and one was a financial metric.
But I believe we had discussed about a dollar amount that we felt was somewhat attributed to it, didn't we, Colleen? And
I guess, do you mean the dollar amount for implementation or the dollar amount risk-wise?
So both, actually. Thank you. So dollar amount that, could potentially cost the city should something catastrophic happen, or should this not be mitigated, but then also dollar amounts to mitigate the risk.
So I think to the earlier comment, the matrix includes the financial impact in its weight, so that's kind of reflected in the weighting. And then on the city cost side, as department heads build our budget, those risks and tasks associated with them are weighed in and built into the respective line item budgets. We tried, I think, last year to do a separate line item for it. We just found that it kept getting trickled into the individuals' tasks that were actually associated with what was being changed, because everything within that matrix is defining typically an operation that already exists.
Yeah, to sort of reprioritize.
Correct, yeah.
And it was difficult. I mean, we tried to identify a dollar amount that you do annually to facilitate this, but when you got into it, it's part of the overall operating budget. And then, if issues came up, they could be prioritized and asked for more money if it was a safety or a potential higher risk issue that was a concern for staff or staff safety and so on.
Sure, yeah, that's great. Do we have anything public facing? I realize a lot of this is something that we need to kind of keep a close hold on, but do we have anything public facing that just sort of explains what this group has been doing in the past and what the plans are for the future, just to before my tenure here as a council member, I heard a lot from constituents of, we're not, planning for the future, or, we don't have any, plans in place if there are any things that, happen, natural events or things like that. Do we have any information that we can share?
The previous executive summaries were available for public distribution. This PowerPoint would also be available for public distribution.
That would be great. Yeah, this PowerPoint actually is something that I think would be perfect.
And this is really, this one identifies our really high-risk concerns. As you get down into more and more of it, there are risks and issues that we do not want to necessarily address as a public knowledge because of concerns of, you don't want to give people the map to it.
Security.
It can be used against you, yeah.
So we try to bring up the summaries. A lot of these items are attached and things that we do, and so this documentation, basically the top 5 ones do encompass a significant component of what, needs to be focused on it right now at this point. The other ones that we've identified as either high risk or whatever concerns, which were identified, have been addressed by our staff. And at this point, there isn't a way to disclose this information without discovering or potentially putting us at risk in security. So I think if there's more questions and whatever, this helps and provides that. If there is more concerns or issues, we can address those individually.
Yeah, I think if we just find a space for this, perhaps somewhere on the web, so that, we don't have to constantly reference the meeting from April 17th, 2023. I think that would be lovely for us to just be able to say, we can be more informed when we speak with constituents during some concerns. But thank you for this. Appreciate it.
Any additional questions or comments? Terry, Lori, Dean, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
I would just like to thank Lori. She's taken a lot of personal time and energy and really helped with this, so thank you.
She has, yes. And as was noted earlier, she also invested significant time conducting a similar exercise for the Saline Area Fire Department, which was recently wrapped up and will now transition into making operational changes and also policy changes to mitigate the risks that were identified as part of that initiative. So much like the city risk mitigation team, it was a very worthwhile exercise and will benefit the fire department for years to come. We move on now to the consent agenda. The following consent agenda will normally be adopted without discussion. However, at the request of any citizen or council member, any item may be removed for discussion.
I'd like to remove item 23-93, contract for code enforcement services.
So that will appear now as the second item under new business. So we're striking 23-93. So that's a motion then by Mayor Pro Tem Dillon to approve the consent agenda as amended.
I have one more I'd like to bring.
Yes?
I would like to remove the 23-90 DEI annual report so that they can present it back to us with a request for financial information.
Okay, that will now be the second item under new business. 2393 will be the third, and I should have noted earlier, there was a revised 2022 Parks Commission report provided to you at the dais this evening. So, Councilmember Rice, will you second the motion then?
Yes.
And Mayor Pro Tem Dillon, you're good with that additional
Yes, I am.
subtraction? Okay, so again, for council's benefit and for the public, we're removing 23-90, which is the DEI annual report, and 23-93. All those in favor of approving the consent agenda as amended signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. We move to unfinished business, item 23-86, ordinance number 855, marijuana amendment. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the memo from Community Development Director Harrington and to approve or not to approve ordinance number 855, an ordinance to amend Chapter 22, Article 5, and Article 6.
Move to acknowledge.
Moved by Mayor Pro Tem Dillon, just to acknowledge. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Kamara Sulak. Mr. Harrington, do you care to make a brief comment?
Yeah, absolutely. So just for the public's benefit, to go over what the ordinance is, it has a couple modifications to our marijuana ordinance. It first establishes a 250-foot buffer from city parks and museums for both medical provisioning centers and adult use retail marijuana centers. I attached buffer maps in all of your packets, and the cadence of 250, no buffer, 500, 750, 1,000 foot. It requires the submission of an updated application should applicants wish to change location. It was currently a loophole or an ambiguity in our license process, not really a loophole, but the requirement is independent of the required special land use process and site plan review. So there are 3 layers that would prevent them from moving location without the city's knowledge. It clarifies that the city's standards shall match the state as it relates to potentially expired licenses. We further got clarification from our attorney that our standard for applications as it relates to disclosure of past criminal conduct was in fact adequate. It was only they have to disclose it. It's not barring them beyond the state's own standard for receiving a license, so we're compliant with the state regulation on that. We allow the submittal of a singular site plan for establishments looking to co-locate medical and adult use to avoid redundancy, confusion, and the stalling of the planning process. There's an added caveat now that we can always request additional information as needed for the review of applications. Currently, applicants are allowed to renew their license or are informed that their license is expiring 90 days prior to its expiration. They used to have between 90 days of expiration and 60 days of expiration to renew their license. We're now saying between 90 days of expiration and 45 days, so it gives them 15 extra days to renew their license. It was more consistent with our other licenses throughout the city, so just to keep it consistent for city staff to make sure that we're holding all licenses the same. And then lastly, it properly numbers the medical marijuana ordinance section. Previous adopted iterations of this ordinance had mistakenly numbered both the adult use and medical section numbers the same. Unicode auto-fixed that for us, but we'd like to amend the record to be properly reflective of what the ordinance section should be. So those are the 7 key changes of the ordinance.
Very good. Councilmember Gearbaugh, as the liaison of the Planning Commission, do you care to provide any additional remarks?
This one didn't go to planning.
Oh, excuse me. Yeah. My apologies. Very good. Thank you, Mr. Harrington. We'll open up for questions. And again, it's just a motion to acknowledge receipt. Mayor Pro Tem Dillon.
So, thank you. I think that the last time we were talking, we really sort of got kind of caught up on the buffer zone distancing and things like that. So what I'm trying to figure out is how this will impact future use. So should a parcel be rezoned to where that's currently not? Do we have any opportunity to say, okay, we are rezoning this to, what is it C1?
It's all C districts, yes.
All
So C1, C2, and C3.
Okay, that we rezone it to that, but we do not allow marijuana in that area?
Not necessarily, no, unless you put it next to another dispensary, or in this case, if you pass this ordinance allowing for a buffer from parks or museums, the buffer would apply to it. But no, we cannot explicitly state as a requirement of rezoning that it cannot be, from my understanding, a marijuana dispensary. The one potential caveat is that our I-1, our light, or it's a light industrial district. There's no industrial uses really allowed. It's very much like a general contractor's with other shops mixed into it. It's that section on Bennett Street in North Ann Arbor is currently our existing I-1 district. You could always zone to I-1 because it's tight. Marijuana is not a permitted use in I-1. So if we expand our scope of what the I-1 district is supposed to be, which is a conversation I've been in with some folks who live in are operating a business out of the I-1 district, we could always pursue that route. So we could create effectively another commercial district that doesn't allow marijuana for that exact purpose, if that was your intent.
Okay, I think that's getting to what I was trying to get to. So I appreciate that. And then, because I tried to go zone by zone of where we're at right now. So basically, theoretically, the west side is zoned out right now because we have a school.
Yeah, so it's not only the west side is zoned out, so even the buffer maps I showed you that show the west side being totally zoned out don't even feature the school at this point in time.
Right.
But the properties are much closer together. One of those that has recently opened is like kind of smack dab in the middle of that commercial district with a 1,000-foot buffer ring, really pushes most people out. The LaFontaine dealership would be the exception, but that would absolutely be pushed out as a result of the Catholic Church opening a school.
Right.
So I would say that so long as one dispensary remains on the west side of town, it would be virtually impossible to add another dispensary with or without the park buffer.
Right. So there's technically two dispensaries there, one that's open, one that's been approved.
One that, yes, has preliminary approval and
Right.
is likely coming back for final site plan at this
Right.
point.
So if at some point either both of those were to close, something else could still go in there or it's actually now zoned out completely because of the school.
I think that the parcel where Rush Cannabis is 751, that's the former Mickey's location, just for terms, would technically still be eligible should the school open, because I don't believe it is within 1,000 feet of that school property. I would have to verify that really quickly for you. But yeah, so essentially I think if two of them close, there's likely a chance that if you pass no parks buffer, that you might be able to replace it with one, but there's no chance that you could possibly have two on the west side of town unless LaFontaine subdivided and became another small commercial district essentially.
And then when we talk about parks, does the river constitute a part of our park?
Well, Mill Pond does, yes, so both sides. It's where the city owns, its official partial boundary goes over the river, yes. So yes and no. The whole river itself, though, is not a park.
So it's not included in the aspect of the park?
No, so Mill Pond would include, so that we own both sides of Mill Pond. So we own both the west side and the east side of the river in that specific location. So in that scenario, yes, and then honestly in Curtis Park too, where it winds a bit, we own both sides of the river. But north of that, where the Saline River enters the community, and then south of that, where the Saline River exits the community, where it does not run through a park, it would not be covered by this ordinance.
Right, but, so it is part of the
Yes.
actual park?
Yes.
boundary. So, okay. Okay, thank you, I'll stop there.
Any additional questions? Appears to be none. Oh, go ahead, Mr. Germain.
Even though this is dealing with more the zoning and stuff around museums and our parks, as we talked earlier, there's been new ruling related to how the decision-making of who is allowed a marijuana. It's the law that, it was an appeals court thing ruled this weekend or last week, whatever. Does that have anything to deal with this, or do we need to discuss that at all at this point?
I'm going to have to talk to our attorney on that. I'm still not totally cognizant of the ruling.
I see Colleen nodding.
Yeah, from what I've just read an article on it, I haven't read like the brief on the actual legal case. It sounds like that may have been more in relation to like the communities that had discretionary, standards for what they allowed. But certainly I can ask the city attorney to provide a memo on the subject.
I was just curious if that would impact any of this, so that's fine. So when I'm looking at the 250 boundary, Mr. Harrington, I'm looking at the map, trying to figure out what those little properties are. How far does that reach back? Is that past the Tractor Supply?
Yes, that would be well into the industrial area. So the Tractor Supply is between those two red highlighted parcels at the top there. So Tractor Supply is immediately adjacent to the one that's kind of an alcove, where that was 7608, that was the woods had the concept for a new build on that site. So yes, it goes well beyond, or that, sorry, for the parks buffer, the museum buffer goes to that parcel. So it would cover Tractor Supply and that spot next to it.
I was just wondering when I looked at it, because the green spot, the larger green little section is the museum, and I didn't know if the 250 start, the way it's circled, is that's 250 feet from the boundary
Yes,
of the
from each
property?
boundary, yes.
Make sure, okay.
It's hard to do multiple buffers on a single map, so I
I know.
apologize.
I'm
It's
trying to understand
visually
how that
confusing,
is.
I'm sure.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
If there's no additional questions, we do have a motion on the floor moved by Dylan, second, oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, that brought up a question for me, Mr. Gerbach's comments. So one of the things that I'm having trouble with this is, I'm assuming we're grandfathering in the current applicants who,
Legally, we're required to, yes.
really excited about some of the applicants and some of the development potentials, and really concerned about should those businesses change hands? Are we still then, so say the car wash gets developed and there's a dispensary in there and that business changes hands, or can they change hands and become another dispensary?
Yeah, so there's a couple of overlapping requirements that are going to be featured there. One is with the license itself, and then one is with the special land use site plan process. So the special land use follows a combination of both the applicant and the property. If they were to buy out the applicant and own the applicant, they would own the approval granted to said applicant effectively. They can't sell it, it's non-transferable, but as a part of owning the applicant, you could potentially then fall under that. So let's say that one of the dispensaries gets bought out by another dispensary. If they just change signage in the interior of the building, if they redo the display, they feature new products, whatever, that would fall under the site plan. But if they stop services, so the applicant's bought, they remove themselves from the vicinity or the store, and then a new applicant wants to come in, that's when they would be effectively buffered out at that point in time by our new ordinance. So if they were fully acquired and they continue the operations, it would be acceptable, but if they were not fully acquired or otherwise went out of business and then a new one wanted to enter, that's where their discrepancy would be.
Yeah, and that's where some of the pain comes to me, because I see this as Saline taking advantage of the changing culture in the world. We're going to get some tax revenue from this. We're going to have buildings that are rehabilitated, that look nice. We're going to have different uses for different buildings. I don't want to get us into a point where we have zoned ourselves out of these opportunities. Marijuana is not going to go away, just as liquor stores have never gone away. And so long as we are creating ordinances that truly keep, and then the state is doing this as well, truly keep retail sales out of the hands of individuals under the age of 21, that I am comfortable with the applicants and the retail sales that we are bringing forward. And I don't want to limit ourselves to create these, not in my backyard areas where we only allow marijuana over here. I don't think that's fair to the business owners. I don't think that's fair to the patrons of these retail facilities. I truly understand wanting to keep marijuana out of the hands of our youth. Fully agree with that. But from a business and a community perspective, I don't think that can be our only focus. So long as this remains within this, I do still continue to vote no on this.
Any additional questions for Mr. Harrington or staff?
I just have a follow-up to Ms. Dillon's comment from earlier. So it looks like from the church, from St. Andrew's Catholic Church, which is opening the school, that the buffer would extend and effectively buffer out all properties on the west side of town. So regardless of whether there's a parks buffer or not, because of the opening of the school, all commercial properties on the west side of the town would then be buffered out in perpetuity going forward, provided that they didn't go through that kind of specific process of acquisition and then continuous operation that I just mentioned, and in addition, compliant with whatever state requirements there might be to continue that license at that location.
And back to what I was saying, I agree with a school buffer zone. I will never agree to that. But that has now made it so that we can only have marijuana dispensaries on the east side of town, and then we're narrowing it. We're going to have like one shopping plaza and one dispensary, which I don't think from a consumer or economic standpoint that is fair.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor to acknowledge receipt of a memo, which I'm going to call for a vote on. It's been properly moved by Dillon, seconded by Kamira Sulak. All those in favor of acknowledging receipt signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. Is there a motion to approve or not to approve, or approve with amendments?
Move to approve.
Moved by Gearbock to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Del Orco. Is there any additional discussion on the motion? Mr. Gearbock.
I do know that, a 500 or 750 might be better to address it, similar to what we've done with the schools and everything. But the concern that Ms. Rice has mentioned, and the fact that we want to not necessarily zone everything out in the city, I believe this is a fair compromise, and it at least addresses the issue closest to our museums and such. Right now, we do know that if one of those were to close, you could open another one where High Society is. If that was to close, there's a significant amount of space in there, on both sides of Michigan Avenue and all that, in order to handle that. And the aspect that the west side won't have it because of a school, that's not our call. That's the state that allows it to be that way. So I think this is a fair compromise at this point.
Any additional discussion on the motion? No, then I'll call for a vote. It's been properly moved by Gearboss, seconded by Del Orco to approve. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Ayes have it. The motion carries 4-1. Is that right? 5-1, excuse me. Okay. 5-1, with CO being absent. Thank you very much. We move on to new business item 23-89, capital improvement plan for FY 24 through 29. This is an issue that has been discussed previously, but this will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the memo from Treasurer Cole and to approve or not to approve the capital improvement plan for FY 24 through 29.
Move to acknowledge.
Moved by Gearboss, simply to acknowledge. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Dillon. City Treasurer Cole, do you care to make some brief obligatory remarks for the public's benefit? Then we'll open up for questions.
Thank you so much, Mayor Morrow. Just for the public benefit, this capital plan is from fiscal year 24 to 29. We have 54 projects totaling just over $134 million. For fiscal year 24 only, the projects are totaling just over $30 million, and there are about 33 projects for this next upcoming year. The largest project out of all of those is certainly the city's wastewater treatment plant renovation for $64.2 million. The capital plan is in its inaugural year in ClearGov. The software is available online, and for transparency and better communication between the city and its stakeholders, it will be available. Once approved, if approved, it can be viewed at city-saline-mi-projects.cleargov.com. There you'll be able to find the project scope, timelines, location, funding sources, and cost estimates. In addition, anyone can sign up for project notifications to get any updates throughout the year. As the capital plan is live and continuously changes are being made, just so you know, we have updated the Mill Pond project for the $800,000 grant that the city has received. Also, we're looking at soon there are probably going to be changes to the North Ann Arbor Street project. Staff has recently identified several requirement timelines of the $500,000 in federal funding received that will be challenging for us to meet. Therefore, we are reevaluating other roads to use the funding for.
Very good. Appreciate those remarks. Are there questions for the city treasurer? Mr. Gearbock.
Can you clarify for me, and we've been talking about this, and in fact, we have a almost $250,000, $260,000 deficit for the current budget numbers. When I look at the $30 million it says in funding sources, are those funding sources all identified at this point in time?
No, not all of them are identified at this point in time.
So I like this process. This is one of course, and we look at this information, I'm so appreciative of staff identifying what they believe are the key issues and everything. What I struggle with is identifying a capital project where we don't have the sources identified, especially if it's within 1 year. I guess I'm trying to understand, and I know this is kind of an idea of where we'd like to be, but why would we identify aspects in 24 that we know we can't fund at this point, especially when we haven't yet made a decision on how to address the deficit for operating?
So simply, these are projects that are underway for the city or projects that are absolutely essential for the city to complete throughout the next year. So those funding sources will need to be identified, and in fact, this document was what helped us realize how much money we actually needed to complete those projects for the year.
So how do we delay those projects or identify those projects if we don't do them in this capital project? I feel like we're adopting something that we can't accomplish because we don't have the funds for those.
If I may weigh in here, so you were all also previously provided a scoring matrix for those projects. As we know, there are reach goals, and then there are essential activities that we have to do. Projects that are underway that we have a gap for, we need to find the financing for. Projects that we would like to achieve, you really won't see those just sitting in the FY24 budget. We've made the changes within this capital project. We've made the changes within the FY24 budget now to reflect only the projects that are absolutely essential and the gaps. So we're talking about gaps with East Belt. We're talking about gaps with the pump station modernization project. We're talking about gaps that may have arisen just from repair needs that we've identified at the wastewater plant, for example. All other discretionary or, scoring that is outside of that essential range has either been moved to 25 or a later year and is kind of soft targeted for grant opportunities or sort of, other more creative financing.
Okay. Because again, when I'm looking at if we don't solve the deficit problem, where will we cut?
Well, I would certainly not recommend essential infrastructure.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So I guess putting those numbers together and then also understanding, because I look at some of these items and I still feel some of these are discretionary because of operations. But I guess that's it for me right now, is really understanding, we have $30 million of projects identified, how those are fully funded, and what, if we don't have dollars in our savings or from grant money coming in, where those resources are.
I think it'll be better to visualize what we're talking about here when we bring the FY24 budget back, because as you recall, we brought the FY24 budget as hey, here's everything that needs to occur in our first conversation. We heard your feedback. We've made those changes. The FY24 budget revision that you guys are going to see next takes into that consideration and will be fully balanced. And it will make recommendations as to what needs to be changed to a future year and what needs to be, eliminated.
And I would like to add that, the plan is a plan. And so we certainly want to include everything that the city needs. It makes it so that many projects you aren't able to receive grant for unless they are identified in these plans. So this really does help us identify and obtain those resources as well.
Okay, that's it for me. Thank you.
Additional questions? Mayor Pro Tem Dillon?
Thank you. I definitely had some of the same questions that Mr. Yearbaugh had, and so I'm trying to kind of go through and understand this a little bit better. What sort of struck me is the category fund balance. And are we actually using fund balance dollars, or are these unassigned or assigned fund balance dollars?
These are more items that can be funded from general fund budget. So maybe fund balance isn't the correct term for it. It's more budgeted expenses. If you notice, they're all low dollar numbers.
Well, that's what it didn't matter the number, to be honest with you, it just the category. So it's not actually fund balance dollars?
No, fund balance dollars would only be used if we budgeted to use fund balance dollars. For example, the $10,000 for city parking lot signs, that'll just be a budget line item. Okay. But the FY24 budget itself won't show us using fund balance. So maybe it's just not the correct labeling for it.
Maybe more think of it as general fund funding source.
Can we make that?
It's not even general fund, though. It's just because there's wastewater items in here, there's general fund items in here.
Yeah, I guess I just don't understand.
Budget, maybe it's just budgeted items or.
So then why is it separate than other aspects? Like, why would it not have fell under something? I guess.
And perhaps the term operating budget might be a better definition for that category.
Okay. Or from operating capital.
Yeah.
Okay.
Operating capital, I think, is even better. I would make, unless there's objection from the dais, I'd make that change, because I think the way it's worded now is not appropriate.
Okay. And then trying to understand, is there a way to figure out, first of all, if there's a way in the future to make this on a bigger sheet of paper? I would greatly appreciate it, because I'm going a little blind right now again. Yeah. So things like the city parking lot signs, and I'm not going to nitpick this document, I'm just trying to understand. I thought we had like TIF dollars or something for that. So like when I see it in the category of fund balance, then I'm like, wait, isn't that supposed to be someplace else? So just trying to understand.
So all of those dollars are allocated, and we certainly can provide you with a sheet that shows what funds are being pulled from what sources.
Okay.
You can also go on the transparency website and see what funding sources are being used by a project. So a lot of projects have multiple funding sources.
And I understand that. What I want to do is sort of go back to what Mr. Gearboss said, is I want to make sure that I'm not approving something that we don't actually have money for and committing us to projects that we know we don't have money for. Just, I appreciate that it's a wish list, and I know that with grants, there is always that thing, because that's the first thing I always ask. Do we have a project that could fill this grant? I ask, how many times do I send you that email? So I appreciate that. I just wish there was a better way that we could delineate that this is a wish, or like it's just sort of in a hold versus a happening project or something like that.
Well, I think we do that by separately adopting our FY24 budget, and no financing is incurred, no debt is incurred by the city without council's approval.
I understand that, but I just want to make sure that like we're keeping our priorities in check with things like that, because there's just certain things that I'm just trying to figure out about. Like there's quite a few items for the rec center that are all listed as unfunded. So are they just in a holding pattern and we're not committing anything to them?
Correct, and you'll see in the FY24 budget the revisions that we will provide at our it's our May 1st meeting, so our next meeting. It will, in our notes now, it shows what those projects are, but reduces that line item to only what can be afforded within the revenues that are received by the fund. Anything else would be, targeted if our revenues exceeded expectations or a grant opportunity arose, et cetera.
Okay. Because I just want to make sure that we're not committing ourselves to these. These are just things that we would like to do.
Yeah, maybe
we have this.
Maybe it would help to think of it this way. The capital plan, in my mind, is really a staff document. This is what we'd like to accomplish. These are the projects that we'd like staff to be focusing on when the resources and the funding is available. Some projects have a higher priority. We have to find the funding for them. Other projects are, this is something we know that needs to occur. We can't, turn a blind eye to it, but let's track it. Let's keep an eye on where that project is, and when we have the financing for it, make it happen.
Okay, I appreciate that. Because like I said, we just still have a lot of missing pieces. We're still waiting on the feasibility study. We're still waiting on a lot of different pieces, so I want to just make sure that approval of this is not earmarking dollars.
You are not binding us to spending $134 million by any stretch of the imagination.
Thank you very much.
And let me add too, the city has maintained a capital improvement plan for many decades. Obviously, this process that's being rolled out tonight is far superior than its predecessors, in my judgment, but I think that's shared by the city manager and treasurer as well. It doesn't change the fact, however, that this is a very fluid living document, and things move and things change as specifically as funding becomes available, or as time or staff attention is freed up. So I think that's an important point to convey, not only to my colleagues on the dais, but to the community as a whole.
Absolutely. This is a plan. This is not a commitment of resources for these specific projects. As the city manager O'Toole mentioned, this is certainly a staff document. These are all the things that your department heads, the leadership of the city feels that the city could benefit from. In some cases are essential, in some cases are not essential.
Thank you very much.
Any additional questions before we vote on the motion to acknowledge receipt? Mr. Gearbaugh.
Just for me, clarifying, I think where I had a little bit of a misunderstanding is when you look at the one document, I'm not sure the page is, it says total funding sources. That includes the unfunded. And so for me, it was a little bit misleading. Now that I understand that you've included the unfunded in there, total, it's not really, we have those sources available.
Right.
Even though it says total funding sources. I'm not sure how to clarify that.
Yeah,
So
maybe we can work on.
Well, you could pull out the total from the unfunded category, which is 52 million.
No, yeah, which is 5,383,000 if I'm looking at.
For FY24, yeah.
Which helps me, but when I was looking at it, I saw the bottom number, it says total funding source is $30 million. And I'm like, We don't have that. But we have $25 million that we do have. is
Correct.
What you're saying.
Correct, yep.
That's very helpful.
Mr. Chamier, a quick question before we vote?
Yeah, so these labels are going to be tweaked, so it's clearer for us, because I don't know if I'll remember all of that, say, tomorrow.
Absolutely. So we will make all the changes that were suggested here this evening
Okay.
that we're able to.
Because that really helped.
Basically, word choice and diction. It doesn't change the substance of the document.
Right,
It
right.
makes it a little bit more accessible, not only to council, but to the general public.
Yeah, thank you for all the work you put into this. This is a big, a lot to take in, looking down the line. Thank you.
Certainly, it was our pleasure, and we do really appreciate your suggestions as well.
There's a motion on the floor moved by Gearboss, seconded by Dillon to acknowledge receipt. All those, I'm sorry.
I have a quick comment.
Yep, please.
I just want, for any of my colleagues who haven't taken the training, I've cleared the, Mr. Gerbach and I have sat through a very lengthy training by City Treasurer Cole and City Manager O'Toole. And for council, our view on this, it kind of takes this spreadsheet and breaks it apart. You can look at diagrams and stuff, and it shows the funding sources, and they've made nice notes in there about, like, this isn't funded yet, or we're gonna go towards this grant, or things like that. And I think it helps take that spreadsheet that we're looking at and make it more of like a conversation and helps answer some of these questions. So if you haven't taken that training yet, I highly recommend it. It's a really useful tool.
Thank you. Motion on the floor moved by Gearboss, seconded by Dillon to acknowledge receipt. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. Is there a motion now to approve or not to approve the capital improvement plan for FY 24-29? Moved by Gearboss, is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Del Orco. Is there any additional discussion or debate? All those in favor of approving, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. We come to new business item 23-90. This is a motion to acknowledge the receipt of the annual DEI report.
Motion to acknowledge.
Moved by Rice to acknowledge. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Del Orco. Councilmember Rice, I believe you're the one who requested this be removed from the consent agenda. Do you have a comment or a concern you'd like to address at this time?
Yes, just a quick comment, and I know that this request has already been sent by City Manager O'Toole, and we made the same request at the Parks Commission, and this was my fault. I should have sent it in earlier. Director Scruggs did get us back her numbers for the Parks Commission report. I would like, and I believe some of my council members would also agree upon this, I'd like to see some numbers in our annual reports from Parks Commission and DEI and our other commissions as well about activities and expenditures throughout the year so that we can make some informed decisions going forward.
Very good. I don't think there's any objection to that. The only thing that I would add, and I believe there's a working group consisting of yourself, Mayor Pro Tem Dillon, and the city manager, along with, I think, one other staff person, maybe not. But I think that one of the discussion topics that we need to have when we convene this retreat later this summer with all of our boards and commissions is what is our expectation for annual reports? So what specific data do we want conveyed? I think there's an expectation too, I've heard it from Mayor Pro Tem Dillon and others, that formal presentations be done, not unlike those that we heard tonight from the Youth Council and Risk Mitigation Working Group. And a point that I've made on numerous occasions, and I keep belaboring it because with greatest respect, I know that I'm right, which is a lot of these reports get stale when we get into April, May, and June, July, and we're receiving an annual report from a board or commission from the previous calendar year. So I think that's something that you all can discuss in your working group, and then we can have really tight messaging on when we convene our retreat later this year. But specifics of what we want to have conveyed, whether we want that as consent agenda items or formal presentations, and when it ought to be done during the calendar year.
If I may, Brian.
Yep. Please.
We're working on actually just providing a template when we get.
Perfect.
It's plug and play every year, and it's no additional work for the committee chairs.
Perfect. Very good. Okay. Is that what you were going to say?
That was what I was going to say is, yes, we are working on some standards so that it will be for each committee, and there'll be that expectation of what will be expected so that they're providing the information in which we.
Very good.
When
Mr.
will
Gearbox?
that be ready? I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
When will that be ready? Because that would be very useful for all the groups.
That's sort of the phase 2 of what we're doing right now.
Yeah, I don't know if we want to launch into the update since we're talking about it.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, we were going to provide an update at the end of the meeting.
Let's do that.
Yeah.
That's fine. Okay. Mr. Gearbox, anything?
I'll wait till then.
Okay.
That's fair.
Councilmember Rice, anything further? No. Okay. We have a motion on the floor moved by Rice, seconded by Del Orco to acknowledge. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. We now move to new business item 23-93, contract for code enforcement services. This will be a motion to appoint Barry Pennick as code enforcement officer for the city of Saline.
Motion to acknowledge.
Moved by Dillon to simply acknowledge. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Kamir Sulak. Would you like to begin, Mayor Pro Tem Dillon, with a question or concern?
Sure, thank you. I did have an opportunity to speak with Mr. Harrington about this. First of all, I wanted to have it pulled off of consent. It's a new position. It's a contract. I just thought it was deserving of discussion and acknowledgement beyond consent. I did have a couple of questions about the position, and it was related to the hours per week that this person would work, a minimum of 2 days. And I think I'm going to just yield the floor to Mr. Harrington, who can probably kind of talk through that a little, what his vision of this position is.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I discussed with Mayor Pro Tem Dillon earlier, it's very difficult to find a quality candidate to do 40 hours a week of code enforcement for a variety of reasons. One is that we also have other needs in our department beyond 40 hours a week of code enforcement that we would need someone to work on. So setting building department policy, helping out with the processing of permits, et cetera. So no matter what, a 40-hour-a-week code enforcement position would inevitably involve a person having, plan review background, building background, et cetera. And then you run into the additional conundrum of a lot of those people that would do that would probably take the money and just go on and become a full-on building inspector, plumbing inspector, plan reviewer, et cetera. So it's difficult to fill this niche position because you're pulling from the trades, and then you're also pulling from people who are interested in law enforcement, essentially, because code enforcement is an extension of law enforcement to a degree. And then those people who are really good at enforcement probably are more interested in becoming police. So you kind of run into a conundrum where you have people that would like to do one of those things but don't necessarily gravitate towards either. This is not only a problem that Saline has historically had. We've been through many code enforcement officers in the last decade, but a problem we ran into my other community 3 states over. It's not a fun or exactly exciting position for somebody to do for 40 hours a week. Additionally, I think that 20 hours a week, which is how we've had this position operational for the past several years at least, it used to be split with the assessor, then it was split with a building inspection position. So historically, for the past several years, we've only been operating off 20 hours a week. In searching for a person to fill this position, we were looking for somebody that we thought would produce, a really good amount of work within 20 hours a week, that they were going to work on code enforcement for 20 hours a week. That's not historically been what we've received on the other end of products with past code enforcement officers. So we're excited that we think we have someone that's really going to be able to produce at 20 to 25 hours a week of code enforcement work. The minimum there for 2 days was just to ensure that they're within our community at least 2 days a week, able to handle council or citizen complaints, able to handle directions from myself or the building official, and then able to tackle more proactive items like removing temporary signs from the right-of-way, seeing issues with new developments occurring, et cetera. So I think the contract is written. We're in line with pay. We have someone that's effectively overqualified for the job. He has a plumbing license. He's a licensed building official if he ever chose to flex that credential. He's also a plan reviewer as well. So he's really knowledgeable on the building trades and constructions, which is a huge asset for this position. He's flexible scheduling. He's even able to work on Saturdays, which I think helps tackle some code problems that we know occur on Saturdays when staff is not out enforcing temporary signs specifically. So I guess I can take any other questions on the dynamics of this job, the difficulty in filling code enforcement positions, or whatever other questions you might have.
Any additional questions for Mr. Harrington? No?
Yeah, just very quickly. So thank you very much for that comprehensive analysis there. What I wanted to know is, so you mentioned that he's going to work afternoons and Saturdays. So does he have other employment that he has?
He's actually the current plumbing inspector for the city of Ann Arbor.
Okay. I just want to make sure that that's not going to trump his position here, that it's not going to blend over. And I appreciate that you're giving a lot of latitude as to the time, but I do want to also have that element of consistency.
Mm-hmm. That was absolutely a point in our conversations with all the folks that we interviewed. Most of them had other full-time employment, and we're really looking to do this as a plus and job. And one of the things that we were really, talking about is if we have to appear in court. So if our code enforcement officer writes a citation, I'm not able to go to court on their behalf and talk about it. They have to appear as themselves, as the party that wrote the ticket, that took the photographs, that witnessed the violation. So that was definitely a point that, if you do write a citation and you do have to appear in court, you have to appear in court. So that was something that we discussed and something that he said that both his current employer and himself would be amenable to doing, especially because there's often really advanced notice with those things. Additionally, he's provided us flexibility. We're providing him flexibility. So if there was an urgent enforcement action needed on a morning, he could likely rotate his schedule and make it happen for us. And additionally, for basic day-to-day code enforcement stuff, if we get a report about something ongoing, work being done without a permit, most of that stuff continues throughout the day, or the building official or myself could run out and go tag it before the construction activity leaves. So.
And so that leads me to my next question of, because we've now had a bit of turnover, and with that comes issues when it's related to court. So when that individual leaves, so does the citations that they issued are no longer valid. That's correct?
It's not necessarily that they're no longer valid, is that we don't have anyone to appear as a witness in court. So effectively, the judge could still look at the documents, and whether they're admissible as evidence or not, choose to make a ruling one way or the other. In the previous instance, we had 2 outstanding citations. We settled both of them outside of court, and they were both dismissed effectively as the process went. So yes, if he were to leave, we would once again have to go through a process of trying to settle the issue outside of the courtroom and then dismiss the suits formally. So.
Okay, I appreciate that. So the last thing I wanted to mention is there any opportunity to utilize our police staff as far as identifying and assisting with code issues? I mean, they're out monitoring our streets, our neighborhoods, and to where they can say, hey, look, there's an issue here, whether they're writing citations, whether they're pulling signs. It is a bit beyond the scope of their normal duties, but I think that at some point, everybody has to kind of lean into to getting this done.
Right, so I guess it's more of a capacity issue. Maybe the city manager or Chief Radzik could answer the specific.
And I'm not looking for an answer.
Right, yeah, but
I'm just putting it out there.
So potentially, and then we've provided training to the VIPs to show them like common types of issues. This is, the grass line can't be more than 6 inches. Most people's smartphone is about 6 inches tall, so that's the metric we give people. If your grass is taller than your phone, probably an issue. Same thing with sidewalks, with snow coverage at least. And then just informing them generally what blight is or what the right-of-way is, so they are aware of that. I haven't had any reports given to me from the VIPs about code infractions, so I don't know how proactively that's being conducted or if it's being conducted at all. But obviously it's a volunteer group of people, so there's not really my expectation that they were going to fully conduct those activities either. So.
Okay, thank you. And when I did mention police staffing, I did mean encompassing all the VIPs, the cadets, the officers, everybody. So, thank you.
Any additional questions for Mr. Harrington? Mr. Gearbaugh?
No questions, just statements. I had earlier asked about, how will you manage and benchmark and set expectations up for this position? And he's talked about how that will happen. Part of my hope is that this will be more of a proactive, not necessarily reactive approach. And the other question was, because of the way the contract was written, it made it sound like you could work 2 12-hour days and accomplish all of that. And I'm glad that he's looking at spreading that out and assessing a schedule that's more reflective of what happens than necessarily. Not everything happens in 2 days of the week. They generally happen every other day. So I'm glad to have it. And the other part of this, I'm fine with this contract because I think, as you indicated, trying to get somebody to fill this position is difficult. And if there's individuals that we can do like this, it's just the issue, and as Councilmember Dillon mentioned, conflict of commitment, making sure that what we're paying for and getting paid at another position doesn't conflict. And if that does happen, we have the outlets in the contract to address that. So, thank you.
Absolutely.
Any additional comments? Again, we just have a motion to acknowledge. Let me say this. Of course, I'll vote in favor of the motion to acknowledge, and hopefully there'll be a subsequent motion to appoint. I will say this, and I understand the challenges that exist on the ground today in April of 2023. And I'm also not going to cross a line and get into operations here, because the hiring, retaining, supervising, disciplining, That's your purview, not the purview of the mayor or any member of the policy board. But what is a policy decision that I'll continue to be an advocate for as funding becomes available in future years is to reestablish this as a full-time 40-hour-a-week job. Because to Mr. Gearbaugh's point, I don't think you can successfully be proactive on the code enforcement front if you don't have the boots on the ground consistently 5 to 6 days a week, 40 hours per week. So again, I know that's not doable in this budget, and it probably doesn't make sense with the current conditions on the ground, but that is something that I will continue to be an advocate for in 2024, 2025, and beyond. Okay. There's a motion on the floor moved by Dillon, seconded by Commander Sulek to acknowledge. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Ayes have it, and the motion carries unanimously. Is there a motion now to appoint or not to appoint?
Move to appoint?
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded again by Commander Sulek. So that's moved by Dillon, seconded by Commander Sulek. All those in favor of appointing say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Ayes have it, and the motion carries unanimously. We move to a new business item, 2397, reverse osmosis membrane purchase. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the memo from wastewater treatment superintendent Briggs and to approve or not to approve the purchase and installation of reverse osmosis membranes from Process Solutions Incorporated in an amount not to exceed $123,000.
Move to acknowledge and approve.
Moved by Gearbaugh to acknowledge and to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Rice. Thank you very much. It's pretty straightforward. Mr. Briggs, would you care to make a brief comment for the record?
Brief comment for the record. These membranes were fouled last year when we were had trouble getting pre-filters. And so we actually got some pre-filters that were not amenable to the purpose that we desired. So it fouled these particular membranes, and we do have the funds at this point in time to be able to replace them. So I'd just rather do that sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. Thank you. Questions for our wastewater treatment superintendent? Mr. Gearbaugh.
Can you remind me, you've mentioned it in your memo too, about how often these have to be replaced?
About every 3 to 5 years. These are at least 3 years old, plus the fouling. The other set that's in the other RO are probably about the same age or a little older. We expect those because we haven't had any issues with them, and we hope they'll last till fiscal year 25.
And how do we prevent the fouling? Because I think we've had a situation years ago where another problem had happened with the membranes and how they were addressed.
We did, from what I hear, that was more of an improper cleaning procedure, cleaned at the wrong sequence, and that caused that fouling. But this is material we believe that's come from the iron filters that the pre-filters are supposed to take out. And so we've cleaned them 3 or 4 times in the last 5-6 months. We just don't want to continue that pattern because it's a lot of time and effort. So we figure, plus with summer coming up and the high usage of water, we want to be able to supply plenty of the proper water to the city. So
I'm just glad that you're able to identify what was causing some of the problems and avoid that again, because I know that's basically been your work lately, is identifying and trying to be all that preventative stuff. So thank you very much.
Any additional questions? Mr. DeLarco, please.
Bill, your memo articulates that you weren't able to get the appropriate pre-filters, and that's why we went with this alternative option.
Correct.
But this is moving forward with the appropriate filters because they are now available?
yes, it was in the middle of the COVID problem, and they just were not available. We couldn't find any.
Okay.
And Process Solutions says, well, we have these that are supposed to be the exact replacement. Well, they weren't quite.
Oh, I see.
So we used them in one RO, luckily just one, not both of them. And by the time we realized there was something wrong, we were able to get the proper pre-filters. And
So we've got the real deal now, the OEM, whatever.
Yes.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to make sure. Thanks.
Mayor Pro Tem Dillon.
So there's 2 ROs.
Correct.
And so we're replacing all the filters in 1 unit.
Correct.
And so then you're hoping that we can get another 2 years?
Potentially 2 years out of the other ones, yes.
Okay.
So that set will probably be cleaned in May. They haven't been cleaned for several months. So it's kind of as the differential pressure increases across the filters, that's what determines at what point you clean it. So they might start out at 20 or 30 PSI differential pressure, and then as it climbs and gets to 50 or so, that's when we normally would like to try and change them. These are right now, like I say, they've been running several months and they're not at 50 yet, but we're going to go ahead and clean them in May because of the summer coming up. And we expect them to drop back down to 20 or 30 and continue the pattern.
Okay. So then, do you just perpetually now budget 123,000 like in every other budget? Is that what you're going to do moving forward?
Yes.
To replace them?
Yes. As a matter of fact, I had planned on hoping that these would last till fiscal year '24, and we would do them spring of the actual year of '24 and then fall of the actual '24, so they'd be in two different budget cycles. But these are getting so bad that we just want to go ahead and get them done, and there is money available. So we went ahead and pulled them ahead into basically fiscal year '23.
Thank you very much.
Any additional questions? Mr. Mayor Sulek.
Yes, thank you. I'm concerned about how long until we'll get these to be able to replace them. I see in the proposal it says availability to be advised.
Right. When I first inquired about them, they were in stock. So unless there's been a huge purchase for these, we should be able to get them, I would think, after you guys approve this, hopefully delivery within 2 to 3 weeks, and then schedule the replacement. PSI, Process Solution, comes out and helps us replace them. So we kind of have to schedule them to come in, but we can do that once we get them ordered. So.
Okay. And the quantity is 180?
No, it's 123,000. It's actually 100. It's 117,000 for the, or is that not the question you're asking?
It's at the very beginning, on the far left-hand side, not the total amount of 117, but the quantity.
Number of filters.
Oh,
Number of filters.
Yeah, they're actually short sections that you push in. So there's like maybe 12 or 15 tubes that you have to fill with these number of filters.
Okay.
So like I say, the filters are only about 6 feet long, and the tubes are probably 24 foot long. So it takes four for tube. I'm just guessing. I'm not exactly precise.
They look like pool noodles.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what?
They look like pool noodles.
They kind of do, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
but
I was
yeah.
just shocked to see the number 180 of them.
Yeah, well, it's if you've been down and seen the ROs, they're pretty large.
Okay.
So, yeah.
All right. Very good. Thank you.
Any additional questions? Any discussion or debate on the motion? Thank you, Bill. It's been properly moved by Gearboss, seconded by Rice, to acknowledge and to approve. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Ayes have it. Motion carries unanimously. We move on to new business item 23-98, MDOT agreement for Clark Street. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the memo from City Engineer Humphreys and to approve or not to approve the resolution to authorize staff to execute the contract with MDOT for Clark Street project. I'll move to acknowledge and approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Kamir Sulak. Engineer Humphreys?
Yes, hi, thank you. Yes, as presented in your packet is the standard MDOT agreement. This is for a project that we received federal funding through Washtenaw Area Transportation, so MDOT runs the project for us through a local agency project. Bids were opened April 7th, and Bonson was the low bid. They were within the 10%. They were over engineer's estimate by 7.57%, but with a bid of $1.142 million, they are low bid and within the availability of MDOT's contract. So yes, recommending award of approval, and I will then sign the authorized documents and get the contract moving through the MDOT to get our federal funding.
And I know the answer to this, but I think it's in the public's benefit that it be asked. You or city staff has worked with this vendor before, and you have confidence in the quality of their work.
Yes, absolutely. Fonson just finished up. Last year, they did the Pleasant Ridge project for us and Salt Springs Park actually last year, and then the year before, or a couple years ago, they did Mills Road reconstruction.
They're very good projects.
Yes.
Excellent. Questions for our city engineer? Ms. Dillon.
Just one quick question. So when I look at the cost that was on Exhibit A, it's our portion is $584,100. And so, but we're putting a different number in our economic impact. It's about an $80,000 difference. Are you building in something, or is there something that I'm missing?
Okay, I'm going to.
No, that's correct. There is still a funding gap. That's part of the identified financing needs that we have. So this project, East Belt, and pump station modernization have all been identified as having financing gaps. So we do anticipate having to do a bond issue in FY24 to cover those needs.
Okay, so this project, just to clarify, so we're overcharging this project $80,000?
No, we're not overcharging. The bids came back $80,000 more than we had originally estimated in our plans.
7.6% or something like that?
Okay, I'm just trying to figure out, the number that's in the document as Exhibit 1 shows the balance of the requesting party less, the project less the federal funds, and it's 584,100. On the memo, it says the economic impact is 664,433.
There's a grant.
The contract with MDOT is just for the as-bid Fonson contract. The ClearGov and the document that Colleen is referring to is the overall cost of the project, which includes the overage with Fonson. So I believe the budgeted amount for that bid was a little under $1 million. So we only budgeted 997. I forget what the budgeted amount for the Fonson bid was, but the overall project, when you include construction, engineering, and all of that, is where the overall, is it 90,000 that we're?
I think it's like 82,000, that's the gap, yeah.
Yeah, it's 80,000. Okay, I can't find the numbers through the document. I'll take your word at it because they don't really, what's shown to me doesn't match that. But if you,
Yeah, we'd be
you look
happy
through
to
it, then that's
walk you
fine.
through.
I'm
yes.
just trying to figure out
Yes.
if we were
I'm hoping
building in a
ClearGov
contingency.
I'm hoping the supporting documentation in ClearGov might provide
Yes.
some of that insight also.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Gearbaugh?
Following up on that, I'd like to amend the motion to include the actual cost of what we're agreeing to in this contract into the motion, which I don't see it there. So we need to have that figure. We have it.
And our cost as far as this particular contract is in the economic impact of my memo, 664,433.42. That ends up being the city's cost for the MDOT's award of the contract to Fonson minus the federal funds.
So
But I think what we typically do is we word the motion for the award amount, the total amount, regardless of the sources of
Right,
fund.
right.
Yeah.
Whatever that number is, I'd like to.
Well, and we're not awarding we're agreeing to a contract with MDOT is what this motion is actually for. So
Gotcha.
what I really need is the resolution approved so I can sign the contract with MDOT so that the funding can be obligated. So I agree this is slightly different than a typical contract award where I'm asking for approval of a contract with MDOT and approval of this resolution that's attached. So then this is what MDOT needs so I can go into the MDOT software and sign the contract documents.
So then would we want a motion to award the contract obligating the city to, what is it, the 660?
Yeah,
64434.
Correct, yep. And then also a resolution to, or a motion to adopt the resolution.
Yes.
As the mover of the motion, I don't think it's necessary, but if that's what's required to get a unanimous vote on this, I would accept the inclusion of the dollar amount. Mr. Kamara Sulak, as the seconder, would you accept that dollar amount?
I'm amenable to that, yes.
Okay, very good. Motion is changed then without objection. Any additional comments or discussion? Mr. Gearbaugh?
Is there any anticipation that there may be any discoveries under that road that we're unaware of?
Well, the good news is this is a road project. This is not a utility project, and your chances of unknowns grow exponentially the deeper you go. And we are replacing the full depths of this road, but the full depth of the road in relation to utilities is, 12 inches versus 5-6 feet. So we are installing 2 new storm structures, but we are anticipating this to be a fairly straightforward road project to take a couple months to rebuild Clark Street between Harris and Maple, and it has less risk associated with just the type of project it is.
And we are anticipating anything with DTE going through there and redoing the gas lines?
Well, we have met, gas line. We've met with DTE on both the electrical. They had some concerns with the location of some structures with them. I cannot speak on behalf of the DTE. Dan Cabaj with FMV is here, and he might be able to give a little bit more background on the actual gas that I am not being able to speak on off of the. I was going to introduce him. I was going to introduce him for the next one because he's on that one.
But if you want to comment on that, we would welcome that.
I can. We have talked to Basil at DTE. We have 2 locations where the gas main is a little bit close to the catch basin. They're going to stake that. I think it'll be resolved easily. It is far enough away. They want, I think, 3 feet away. If we're close to that, we can shift the catch basin slightly.
And there's no age condition regarding the line?
No, what they told us, it's a fairly new line. I don't want to say new, 20 years or so.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to confirm, that I thought they had replaced it.
Yeah, I'm thinking that's past like maybe 1980, I remember on the plans, and it is listed as fairly good condition, so unlike some of the other projects, so.
As Tesha has been indicating, we want to make sure these utility things are happening as we do these projects, and that's part of her new plan, so I'm glad to hear that. Thank you.
Any additional comments or discussion on the motion? Again, noting there's some additional verbiage that's been added specifically in a dollar amount. If there's nothing further, all those in favor of the amended motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. We move on to new business item 23-99, Clark Street reconstruction, construction engineering services. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the memo from City Engineer Humphreys and to award or not to award the construction engineering services for Clark Street reconstruction project to Fleece and Vanderbrink.
I'll move to acknowledge and award with including the dollar amount.
Okay, you need to state the dollar amount.
Tesha, do you have?
$153,300,000. $153,300.
Okay, so it's a motion then moved by Gearba to acknowledge receipt of the memo from City Engineer Humphreys and to award construction engineering services in the amount of $153,300 for Clark Street reconstruction project to Fleece and Vanderbrink. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second that.
Seconded by Kamara Sulek. I'll get you on the next one, Ms. Dillon. Tesha, this is pretty straightforward. Do you want to give a few provide a few brief comments?
Yes, a
in
few brief
reference
comments.
to this
Dan Kabaj was just up here. He's with Fleece and Vandenbrink. When they designed this project, they have the experience to do the local agency. We do have slightly increased engineering needs on a local agency project. MDOT's requirements are hefty and deep, and Fleece, I feel confident that F&B can do all of that for us. So, yep, recommend moving forward with this to complete this project this summer.
Very good. Mr. Kabaj, we appreciate your patience this evening, having the second to last item on under new business. Do you care to share any remarks at this time?
I'll just add that, as usual, with every contract we've had, it's not to exceed. So that's in the requirements, the 153. We're very confident, and that's we put it at the comfortable level.
Excellent. Appreciate that. Are there questions for our guest or for City Engineer Humphreys? Ms. Dillon?
Thank you. When is this project slated to begin?
It's slated to begin, I think the earliest it can begin is 45 days after execution of the project. So the very earliest it can begin, if I execute the project tomorrow, would be 45 days from tomorrow. It's anticipated to be a 2-month construction window, so we were aiming somewhere between June and August is what we're aiming for, and we're planning to meet with Fonts. I don't know if you have an update from Fonts, and we're looking to meet with them shortly to get a more firm schedule from the low bid contractor.
So it will be after school lets out?
That's what that's where the time is falling. Yeah, and that's what was always intended.
No, I appreciate that. And the other thing is, will there be like an open house or something for the residents that are going to be impacted by this?
So we do have a website. We did have an open house early in January, but we were waiting on the bids to see if it was a real project. So we are meeting internally to do a re-push of re-notifying everybody. We do have a website dedicated to this, and we are likely going. Yeah, we need to do a little bit more public outreach to get it back up there, because when we did the meeting, it wasn't a for sure project this summer because it was being bid in April. I was concerned prices, if they were more than 10% over, it couldn't move forward. We wouldn't have gone forward this summer.
No, I appreciate that. I mean, two months is going to be a long time for the residents that live there, and it's going to impact, the traffic flow for them of how they're going to get vehicles in and out because they're sort of landlocked there.
Absolutely.
So I just want to make sure that they're very much aware of it in advance, and especially that most of the residents in there are not single-family houses.
Mm-hmm.
So just making sure that the word travels through those complexes so that they do all understand.
Right. Yes, I agree with you. The good thing about this project, because it is a road project, we will, the majority of the project, have access in and out from Harris Street. It's not going to be like where we have to do a complete closure of Maple for Eastbelt because we're digging a big sewer for days on end. So that's the good, but I absolutely agree with you. There's a lot of people that live there. It will have an impact. I think we're going to see a lot more traffic on Harris this summer too, just from the local traffic will be using Harris to get home now, all on Clark, I believe, for a lot of the summer.
Thank you very much.
Any additional questions? Councilmember Rice.
I would actually like to point out that bullet number 2 says that they will be attending City of Saline public informational meetings to review the project and answer questions from public. So unless you're counting city council meetings, it sort of looks like it's built into this agreement to do so anyway, so.
Oh, with F&B, yes, absolutely. Sorry, I was going back to the, yes, absolutely.
Secondary to that, and this is kind of just something to think about, Mr. Harrington, I know that we have some information going back and forth between like Thorncrest Apartments and the building department, so they definitely will want to be one of those folks that is part of this discussion, because if they are going to be doing some construction, it's going to be inhibited by the road work that's going on Clark Street.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think any of it is like major, like they're not going to have to close a street kind of construction. It's all interior. They have a rather large interior lot. But yes, if they'll pick up the phone for our notices, maybe they'll also pick up the phone for a more notice that probably affects them more pertinently than ours do.
That's kind of what I was thinking. Let's not give another reason to not be able to complete that project. That's all I have. Thanks.
Any additional questions? Mr. Gearbaugh?
Just real quick, when we have the road open, we will be inspecting all the water connections to make sure there's not any issue.
So in this case, there's very few water connections on Clark. So there's only 2 or 3 actual residential homes on Clark, because it's mostly multifamily, as you're indicating. I truly believe is there only 4 residential houses along?
Yeah, and some of them are off the side streets.
Yes, yep. Yes.
Yeah, there's a couple that I know that are
Yeah.
significantly old, and I didn't know if they replaced the water last time when they put the sidewalks and all that. But also making sure we inspect the ones for Thorncrest and
Yes.
Clark Hill, because I would hate to have to rip those up for main water lines going into those buildings.
And the apartment complex, all of those have separate private water lines, outside of our shut-off valve. But you're absolutely right. We have to do so many per year, and DPW Director Searles is working on the amount that we have to verify per year per Eagles requirements.
Yeah, I just, knowing that those are nearly 60 or more years old, especially the ones for the bigger.
The closer to Harris.
Make sure
yeah.
that we don't have anything that potentially could fail in the next
Yep.
few years. Thanks.
Yep.
Any additional questions? Is there any subsequent discussion or debate on the motion? Thank you both. It's been properly moved by Gearboss, seconded by Kamira Sulak to acknowledge and to award. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. Final business item of the evening is new business item 23-100, no Mo May resolution. This is just a motion to acknowledge receipt of the memo from City Manager O'Toole.
I'll move to acknowledge.
Moved by Dillon to acknowledge receipt. Is there a second? Seconded by Gearbaugh. City Manager O'Toole, do you care to give a brief update on this issue?
Certainly. So about this time last year, we did have some residents inquire with us whether the city would be supporting the No Mo May movement. I provided some information in my memo regarding research that's been conducted on that, links to sites and support some other communities that have supported adoption of resolutions acknowledging No Mo May. It really differs from community to community how they approach it. Some communities issue complete waivers to allow grass to grow beyond the normal 6 inches. Some limit it to like a rear yard or rear and side yard, and others just kind of have a passive acknowledgement that if a resident says they're engaging in No Mo May, they won't follow through with the citation. What we've prepared is a resolution that kind of has a fill-in-the-blank section for council. If they'd like to consider adoption of No Mo May, then really we'd just be asking you, do you want that to extend to the full yards? Do you want it to be just a portion of yards? Do you want it to apply to commercial and residential, or just residential? And then last but not least, would you like the city to participate in any capacity through its facilities? It is not the recommendation of staff that we not mow all municipal assets, but rather if council wanted us to just set aside small portions of some of our larger parks.
Very good. Appreciate that analysis. Are there questions for the city manager or comments, suggestions on how you would like to proceed? Mayor Pro Tem Dillon.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing this to us. I had mentioned this, it's happening in Ann Arbor, and it was really for everyone's information. I sort of feel like we're a little bit too late to the party at this point, because we had 3 days of 80-degree weather, and 90% of my neighbors have already mowed. Our parks have been mowed. So I kind of feel like we've missed that, and maybe it's something that we have to look to in the future. I will say that I would not be in support of like what Ann Arbor does, which is allows your grass to grow to a foot tall over the course of the month. I think getting that back under control is, we have a part-time code enforcement person who I really would not want to see their entire time spent going around, checking to see how tall people's grass was. We've had issues in the past with varmints, with properties that have blight and uncut lawns. So I think there are definitely some downsides to it. I understand the concept of it. I don't know if there's a way in which we could have pollinator areas, like within a certain area, like we designate, okay, this area will not be mowed for a month, but to not mow yards, parks, things like that, I think could just be unruly.
Yeah, so I can chime in here too. I think it's a point well taken. Thankfully, yards or grass height is actually one of the easiest enforcements to do. We have one specifically for snow and grass because those are our most common ones. We just circle it, put the courtesy notice on the door. We report it in BSNA, which is our permitting system, and then we schedule a follow-up for like a week after, or I think in our specific ordinance for grass, it's like 3 or 4 days, and then we send it over to DPW for abatement consideration. I would say that dealing with residential property owners is probably more of a hassle than dealing with industrial or commercial property owners. You're dealing with one party that has a substantial size lawn, so the goal is to maximize lawn area available, maybe then focusing on industrial and commercial if you didn't want the potential code enforcement implications of not allowing it. Relatively speaking, though, it's pretty easy to not enforce an ordinance for a month, and we could always get back on it. But to your point, I could understand the concern about trying to wrangle residents back into doing it after excusing it for over a month. So,
if I may, my position mirrors that of my colleagues. I do not favor any additional action this year. Looking at and thinking about my own yard, which has not been fertilized by underwood yet, if I took off April and May, I mean, it would be a hayfield by the end of that month. And I don't think that's hyperbolic. And I think to Councilmember Dillon's point, I think that does detract from quality of life in a neighborhood. So I appreciate the information. Thank you for it. It's good analysis and maybe something to consider in the future, but I would not support additional action at this time. I'll go right down the dais so everybody will get a chance to chime in. And we've heard from Mayor Pro Tem Dillon and myself. Mr. Gearbaugh, any questions or comments?
I'm fine with the status quo. There is an issue. As we get more of this global climate change and everything, and warmer Aprils, yeah, 2 months worth of not mowing seems a little bit of a stretch, but I think we deal with it more of an enforcement concern, and I don't know. At this point, I'm not so worried about it. I do like the idea of potentially addressing maybe something in the parks where we have the ability to kind of make it more natural, kind of like the prairie grass that they do in Ann Arbor at Rainier High to that degree, but wherever that's possible, it's not really going to be feasible unless it's really close to a set of woods or something like that. But at this point, status quo is fine with me.
Okay. Mr. Delorco?
We already currently have a large section of one of our parks that's not mowed next to the wastewater treatment plant. That's allowed to grow however tall it can grow, and that can be something we can look to as, we're making a small contribution to this effort, but I just see backlash from the residents if we forgive code enforcement on mowing lawns. There's just going to be people complaining, and I think we have enough of that now.
Councilmember Rice?
So I really love the idea of this for multiple reasons. We talk about increased human-induced changing in climate, and this is one of the ways that humans can help impact the continuation of pollination of some of our native species. However, I do have some problems with, making an official resolution this year without a little bit more information. I would love to see perhaps someone bringing this to the Environmental Commission for next year. Maybe there can be some funding for signs. You can put a little sign in your yard that says no mow May. So it's not just a hot mess of a yard, but it's a yard that's displaying why the yard looks the way that it is. It encourages pollination, things like that. So yeah, I'm in favor of holding off on this for this year, but I don't want to throw out this idea because I do think that as we go forward, it's the year 2023, as we go forward, we do need as humans to come up with some of these different ideas for ways to help, enhance our planet and come up with different ways to save some of the species that we have seen a decline in due to, like I said, human-induced hunting. So, again, if perhaps Mr. Delorco can take this to the environmental commissioners and say, hey, city council discussed this. We're not going to do it this year, but.
Yeah, sure, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, I don't think there'd be any objection to that. Nope.
Thank you.
Mr. Kamara Sulek?
Yeah, I like the environmental impact of it and the importance of saving our pollinators. But I agree with my colleagues that this is something to look at for next year.
All right, so no action, other than we'll obviously take a vote on the motion to acknowledge, and Mr. Delorco, Councilmember Delorco, rather, we will empower you at your convenience sometime in the next several months to add this as a discussion item at the at one of your upcoming environmental commission meetings. Maybe that group can do some analysis and then report back maybe in late winter or maybe even midwinter of 2024.
Sounds good.
Very good. There is a motion on the floor moved by Dillon, seconded by Gearbout to acknowledge receipt. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. We come to the discussion portion of our agenda. First up is Commission, Committee, and Task Force reports from council members. I'll start again to my right and end to my left. Councilmember Kamara Sulek, any Commission, Committee, or Task Force reports?
Well, you heard pretty much the Saline Youth Council's report for the last, for all year. But for going to the DEI committee, there are 2 events coming up. Tomorrow, there is a book discussion, The Origins of Our Discontents by Isabel Wilkerson, and that is at Liberty School at 7 o'clock tomorrow. And then on Wednesday, there's a virtual DEI training, Understanding Privilege. And you can sign up for that, and it's just a 2-hour, 7 to 9 o'clock virtual event. And I would implore everyone that has a little bit of free time to attend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Kamara Sulek, can I empower you to do something either later this week or early next? I saw an email from Grace Wu of the DEI committee earlier today that not only, the email did not only announce the events that you just articulated and extended an invitation to myself and all of the other recipients of the email, but it also mentioned some upcoming events later this summer, including, I think, 2 separate movie screenings and subsequent discussions. Which I thought sounded very interesting. I think the movie Milk was going to be one of the movies that was shown over it's not going to be shown over a 3-day period. I think there were 3 separate occasions in which it was going to be shown, excuse me, and then there was another movie. I just want to make sure that we get that information to our PR generalists so that we can disseminate it through our channels as well.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. There's two events next month, the 17th and 18th, funny enough, and then there's the Milk is June 15th at 6:30 at the Saline Library, and then discussion of Milk on the 20th at Liberty School. But I will go ahead and send that information to Massey and have that distributed to the community.
Very good. Appreciate that. Councilmember Dillon, any commission, committee, or task force reports?
Thank you. The Zoning Board of Appeals has again not met, as we had no appeals brought before us. There is the committee to discuss committees, and I don't know if the city manager would like to take the lead on what's going on with that one.
Sure. So you should have all seen, or if you haven't checked your mailboxes yet, little QR code handouts that PR Generalist Massey made for us. The next step of this process is we have created a survey tool for all committee and commission members. We're asking you to share with your respective committee and commission members that we will be hosting an upcoming joint meeting and that we'd like to get their feedback so that we can identify challenges, issues, items for consideration to bring up during that meeting through this survey tool process. Really the next step here is getting that feedback from all of you, and then at this point starting to build out the presentation for that that'll focus more holistically on how to be a good committee or commission member, what the expectations are, and then some of the other issues that we've identified as being agenda items for that event. Did I miss anything?
Just that, I mean, realistic, we do not feel as though we would ever be able to get all committee members
Yeah.
from all committees in the same room at the same time. So what our anticipation is, at least if a chair is present, to see the committee presentation live, then they will take it back to their committee and watch it as a committee, which sort of checks the box that we know that everybody has been adequately trained from a committee. So we're hoping that's going to be the process for it. And then the second part of that committee's process that we're going to be working on is, you know, just sort of creating those standards, the bylaws, the presentations, and things like that, what the city's expectation is regarding budgeting and outside services and websites and things like that, to where if you're under the city's umbrella, then there's going to be certain guidance to make it a little bit easier for committees. And then also, and it's not just to establish rules, it's more to give them the tools they need for these committees to be successful also, is what the anticipation is.
Very good. Appreciate that. Any additional commissioner?
I do, just very quickly, the fire board met earlier in the month, and there are several issues which are before the fire board that are going to need to come before this body in the near term for some decisions and input. So it is my expectation that we will have a session, probably a closed session, I would assume, to discuss that as a body so that we can bring our recommendations. Mayor and I can bring those back to the fire board.
Very good. Mr. Gearbaugh, Commission Committee or Task Force reports?
One thing I wanted to follow up on, Ms. Dillon, she had mentioned about the commissions and such. Will we be developing some approach in terms of what we as the council need to provide for them in terms of expectations and what we want them to meet?
Yes, we talked about prior to us hosting the joint meeting, hosting a specific work session with just council to talk about really taking that information back that we received from the surveys for our respective committees and commissions, and then turning that into, okay, now how do we outline this to deliver that feedback?
Because I know we felt like we've lacked in what we've given them in direction, and so helping to make it more formalized. I'm glad for that.
Can I ask a quick question? When do we want survey responses completed by?
So I think everyone should have a meeting, within the next 45 days? So ideally.
End of May.
End of May?
Okay. Please make note of that and share that survey is available, and that private citizens who are on our boards and commissions are strongly encouraged to complete it in advance of the
It's a very simple survey. It's like 5
4
questions.
questions.
Yeah, 4 questions.
Please continue, Mr. Gearbaugh, if you have Commission or Task Force.
Mr. Harrington, maybe, I don't know what's going to be in our next planning commission yet, at this point yet?
Yeah, so the next one is likely to feature the preliminary PUD for 207 Monroe. I'm waiting our consultant reports on that, so it's going to be a preliminary discussion on that site. There's no obligation for the city to approve it at that time. It could postpone it or deny it based on whatever factors may be present. Our sign code is likely coming back to the Planning Commission. There's a numerous number of errors that I'm trying to clean up with that. They're doing a wholesale rewrite. It's also going to code review this week. This is definitely going to be a more interesting rewrite, I would say. Signs have a specific issue within our community. Everyone has opinions on what proper signage is. So my goal is to get really substantive feedback from code review. It's kind of hard to disentangle policy from regulatory aspects when it comes to signage. So I really am trying to encourage code review to maybe step outside what they normally do to provide that feedback to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission will likely have at least 2 meetings on it, knowing the Planning Commission, on what proper signage is, at which point it would then come to the City Council. So the sign code is there as well. I believe the Loch Ness Monster sign, Millie, the Bill Pond Monster thing for the Celtic Fest is also on the next Planning Commission meeting. And then there's lastly the master plan survey. We have 287 responses so far. We're going to do another social media push here, but I would encourage all of you to also please send that out as well. We're probably going to close it at the beginning of May and then continue forward on the writing of the substantive plan as Planner Auerbach and I have already begun to do. So
good.
Can you remind me again when the code review meeting is?
Code review is this Wednesday at 4:30.
And then we will be meeting Councilmember Rice and Manager O'Toole with Saline Main Street as our last meeting to wrap up that task group.
Very good. Mr. Delorco, any commission, committee, or task force reports?
Both the Code Review and Environmental Commission are meeting Wednesday of this week, so I don't have anything to report this meeting.
Okay, next meeting then, May 1st. Councilmember Rice, any commission, committee, or task force reports?
Yes, a couple, thank you. For parks, we want to thank DPW for all the hard work cleaning up after the ice storms. The work is continuing on hangers, as they refer to it, so branches that are hanging up in trees that they haven't been able to get up and get to yet. So we're asking that the public keep an eye out for those as they walk through the trails, and they can email myself at nrice@cityofsaline.org, or they can go directly to DPW Director Searles, or go through the city reporting tool as well. As mentioned earlier, the Saline Youth Council, the Environmental Commission, and the Parks Commission are all going to meet at Curtis Park at 3:30 p.m. on Saturday, April 22nd, which is Earth Day. We are going to do some cleanup of the trails, so bring work gloves, wear long sleeves and pants, because you will be going through some brush. The Saline Rec Center survey is also out, so for anyone in the public who missed the opportunity to take part in any of the focus groups, it is on the city's website. I think it's on the homepage. It's on the Saline Rec Center page as well, where you can visit the link and take the survey for the plan for the next 30 years. We've heard a lot from the community about the rec center. This is the feasibility study. So again, be sure to log in and get your information in there as you wish. Historic District Commission meets this week. Spring and summer projects are kicking in. We've got some decisions to make this week. Thanks to our staff liaison, Ms. Sketchman, a letter went out to residents encouraging them to serve on the committee. We did welcome a new member to the committee just tonight, and so we still have a couple more members, as we have some who will be transitioning out at the end of the year. So if you received one of those letters, or if you did not, please feel free to reach out to us and join us. And also look for the Historic District Commission at the Farmers Market in early May. We're going to do a demo on wood window restoration and the importance of maintaining the old style wood windows on your historic home.
Very good. Councilman Rice, can I empower you, because there are potentially some issues with a quorum, not only at your meeting later this week, but at subsequent meetings, and because I know that HDC has some pressing business to deal with, I'll preface, the city clerk and I can provide contact information if you don't have it, both an email and a cell phone. Would you be able to follow up with Mr. Merryfeld, who was recently, or was appointed just earlier this evening? He's very responsive, especially via text or phone call, or by phone message. But I want to make sure that I think he's able to attend this Thursday, and from my conversations with him late last week, he's very enthusiastic and eager to serve. Based on the fact that he's a woodworker and a building contractor, I think he has some expertise that will be beneficial to the group.
That's great.
Thank you. Reports and other announcements. Again, I'll start with Mr. Khmer Sulak.
Yes, the Saline Salutes has their event next Wednesday, the 26th, at the Lake Forest Golf Course at 6 o'clock. So I encourage anybody that can wants to see who and what all the wonderful volunteers in our community have done, and have a good meal and get together. That is Wednesday, the 26th at 6 o'clock. And that's it.
Very good. Councilmember Dillon.
Thank you. I have just two comments that I'd like to make. One is that I'd like us to be a little more cognizant of the privacy of people that are participating on community and committees, in that I feel as though we should not put their application in the packet, or it should be redacted. There's personal information, people's address, there's home phone numbers, cell phone numbers. There's a lot of information in there that I don't think should necessarily be floating around to the public. So I don't know whether we want to redact that or moving forward.
Let me stop right there. I think that's easy enough. I think when the applications are provided in the packet, we just black out or redact, remove phone numbers, email addresses, and personal address.
We could also not include them in the packet, and you can just find them in the SharePoint drive, because Clerk Royal has been adding them
Easier
there
yet.
now.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to suggest, is something like that, because I did also notice that it was also mentioned in the code enforcement contract, there was an address attached to the individual, and I don't think that it's fair to put out people's personal information like that. It's not necessary.
Yeah, I think as a general policy, anytime that a document contains personal information, like resumes or things like that, we can start redacting their contact information.
So just for the record, for all future appointments, you will not see that, that application in the packet. You'll have to go to the shared drive to review that individual's, not only their contact information, but more importantly, the answers that they provide to the pertinent questions about why they should serve, what conflicts they have, et cetera.
And that simple notation on a memo would be great.
Right, that's absolutely. And then the other comment I have is that I would love to have a little bit of a session. It doesn't have to be a full work meeting or something on the reporting tool. I think we need to kind of work through some kinks on that. First of all, just calling it the reporting tool, because I don't think the public understands what that is, whether we give it a different name or it has an icon attached to it. But just understanding what the expectation is with that, of people are posting things to it, and then they have no idea if it just falls off into the abyss, if it's being dealt with, like what the time frame is. So I just think that we need to figure out a way to make it more interactive and understand, so that everybody has the right expectation as to what it is.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think if we're going to do that, maybe we have a work session on external communications then more broadly and talk about that, as well as like the 411 system we have, and, you know, the city's policies on, hey, we don't respond to every single Facebook post, and we don't monitor third-party Facebook posts, things like that.
No, absolutely. I think that's a really great way to do it. I know that we've seen a lot of those coming through. There was an incident with trash pickup, and I had just posted to contact DPW to notify them of it. And then I know there was some additional feedback where there were emails that went out, just so that if people understand what to do, I think it might, like if it's an immediate need, like they didn't pick up my trash, and you put it through the reporting tool, I don't know how long that takes to process, to be acknowledged and be dealt with, versus should they, like, you know, just understanding that part of it.
Do you want to chat with PR Generalist Massey and maybe IT Director Schonk and report back on a time that would be ideal for them, as well as your office, to present on that subject?
Yep.
Okay, very good. Anything else on the reports and announcement front, Mayor Pro Tem Dillon?
Nope.
Mr. Gearbaugh?
Nothing.
Mr. DeLarco?
Nothing.
Councilmember Rice?
Nothing.
Okay, and then the last item was agenda changes, and I believe that was Mr. Gearbaugh.
Yeah, and I appreciate the mayor handling his changes during the meeting, and that's one of my things, and I've made this concern before. Once we publish an agenda, I feel that that agenda should not be changed, and especially when it goes up on the website and so forth. And if there are changes, that we formally address those at the meeting and not necessarily reprint a new revised agenda a couple of times. I mean, we all kind of agreed on the, on our approach to how we were going to handle council meetings and such as part of our guidelines. So keeping minimum last-minute changes, I think, would be beneficial. And it seemed like there were quite a few changes, again, during this meeting. And so I mentioned this to City Manager O'Toole, and I'm just hoping that we can address that more regularly, as not to change the agenda once it's published, and if there are changes, we handle it as the meeting formally to make sure that it's acknowledged publicly, so that people aren't chasing around trying to understand what we changed.
Yep, I agree with that. I don't think there's anything that would prevent us from creating a policy or a commitment that if there is a last-minute change, that the chair or the presiding officer make a formal announcement at the beginning of the meeting. I think that is a best practice, and I'll take full responsibility for the additional item to the consent agenda, which is 2301, the appointment to HDC. I think, as you know, during my tenure as mayor, which is now in its 11th year, I am not an advocate, nor am I a habitual offender in terms of adding things at the 11th hour to a council agenda, specifically appointments. However, in this case, because we have 2 existing vacancies on HDC, one that is forthcoming probably within the next 60 days, and that group has a number of pertinent things that they need to start addressing. I thought it was important to include that. So again, my apologies, that will not happen on any frequent basis, and if you have If you need to look at history, because history is always the guide for how things will proceed in the future, I would note my record. And again, I try my very best not to add things at the 11th hour, because to your point, that's not indicative of a best practice. So, anything else? No? Okay. Then we come to our second public comment period. Under the Open Meetings Act, any citizen may come forward at this time, make comment or question to City Council. This public comment period will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Anyone who would like to speak is requested but not required to state his or her name and address for the record. Any citizen comments from those in the audience this evening? The record will reflect there are none. Clerk Royal, did we receive any written communiques in which the comments should be read at this time? Easy enough. Then please note our 2 upcoming meetings on May the 1st and May the 15th, with a budget work meeting at 5:30 on the 1st. I suspect we will take all of that hour and a half, so please try your best to be punctual. And at this time, the chair would entertain a motion to adjourn this regular meeting at 9:14 p.m.
So moved.
Moved by Mayor Pro Tem Dillon. Is there a second? Second. Seconded by Rice. All those in favor of adjourning say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Ayes have it. Meeting is adjourned.